The stone went dead under my palm for the 6th time, and the whole manor let out this collective, smug little sigh. You know that sound a crowd makes when they smell blood in the water? That was it, except it was my family. 6 years in this world, 6 awakening rituals, and not a trace of Yuan energy in my body. Not one drop. Now, in a world where even beggars have a little magic in their blood, that makes me the village idiot with a famous name. The name was Wilson, and the man holding it was my father, who looked at me like I was a stain on his floor. He didn't yell, didn't disown me with any drama. He just said I should leave Quartz City, as if I were furniture. So I smiled at him, that calm peace that made him uncomfortable, and told him I agreed. I was done too. He told me to drop the surname. And I told him from now on, I'm Lox Zeke, and I felt lighter saying it. My mother's name, Rox, was the only inheritance that mattered. Now I finally got to carry it without him hanging over me. Funny thing about being kicked out though. The servants stopped bowing, and my cousin Nate moved into my room before I even packed. Nate, the smug little cousin who came begging for shelter, decided my room was his now. He blocked my door like a landlord evicting a tenant. He tried to puff up and push me around, but I didn't need a fist. I just looked him in the eye and let it out. Dark red lightning flashed in my gaze, and the guy's mind went blank. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, unconscious before he hit the floor. That ain't killing intent, that's conqueror's hockey. The rarest kind, and the reason I can stand in this world without a drop of magic. I stepped over his body and grabbed one thing from that room. A photo of my mother, watering flowers, half of it torn away. She left me in my 2nd year here, but that gentle face and the way she smiled at flowers is burned into my head forever. I walked out of that gate with nothing but the clothes on my back and a bloodline that whispers I was born to rule, not beg. And I made a promise to myself out on that street. I'm gonna build a family so big it makes the Wilsons look like a roadside stall. You hear that? A man with no magic, no inheritance, and no surname swearing to build an empire. You'd laugh if you had a better offer. First stop was a little alley, where I pulled out a ghost-faced mask and a black cloak that made me look like trouble with a receipt. See, out on the street I was just the worthless son. But underneath that mask, I'm Shura, and Shura has a reputation that makes men cross the street. I slipped into a perfume shop called Tulip Dream House, and let me tell you, the smell hit me like a wall of flowers and fresh laundry. The shopgirl saw the mask and lit up like I was a lottery ticket, whispering to the noble ladies that Shura had come calling again. Those women gossiped like a group chat on fire, wondering what kind of face was ugly enough to hide behind a mask forever. I got led upstairs to a purple room that smelled like tulips and freshly baked cakes, and I finally took a breath after that circus. I called up my system panel, and the numbers glowed in front of my eyes like a stat sheet for a character I was actually proud of. Overlord's bloodline, swordsmanship at sword master rank, armament hockey mastered, observation and conqueror both proficient. Not bad for a nobody. 4 years ago, when my mother died and the world went dark, that system finally finished loading, and it gave me a way out of the gutter. The bloodline lets me train hockey, the 3 powers of a pirate world. No magic. Fine, I'll just learn to bend reality a different way. My conqueror's hockey had even ticked up from beginner to proficient just from the mindset shift of dropping that family name. I'll take free upgrades. I had a fishing minigame in there too. 40 minutes, a tiny boat on a vast ocean, and a rod with no bait. Just patience and reflexes. 37 minutes of my life, and the line finally sank. I pulled up a rotten wooden chest, and you could have heard me grin through the mask. Inside was a pink swirly fruit. A devil fruit from that pirate world, and the name read ripe fruit. I'll be honest, I laughed out loud. You think a fruit that's good at farming is lame, but I'm heading into monster country where food means life. This thing turns hunger into a joke. I already had 5 more devil fruits sitting in my inventory, from ancient dinosaur forms to sand control. I'm a walking grocery store of mayhem. But I don't eat 'em. Hockey and a good sword are enough for now, and I like keeping my options open for when something truly tempting bites. Just as I closed the panel, a soft tulip scent drifted in, and I knew Lady Tulip had arrived. She smells like a garden and walks like a threat. Roland, the woman who owes me everything, came in with a plate of cakes and that smile that says she knows exactly what I'm underneath the mask. She's 29, gorgeous, and calls me young master like it's a prayer. And I mean that with total respect and zero awkwardness about the age gap. I took the mask off, and she didn't even blink. Said she knew it was me all along, that she'd recognize my scent anywhere. My heart did a thing. The woman who runs Quartz City's most exclusive boutique had known the whole time that her mysterious benefactor was the family screw-up, and she didn't care. She fed me cake like I was a damn baby bird, and I let her, because after 6 years of people telling me I'm worthless, that moment tasted like winning. She's got this whole life because I pulled her out of one, and she says she's only 4 years old in her new timeline. I can't argue with the math. I told her I'm leaving Quartz City for good, and those purple eyes went wide, then sad, like a kid watching their favorite toy get sold at a yard sale. She said she could take care of me, and I laughed. I told her I don't look like the type to live off a woman, and she nodded way too fast. A smart woman knows when to hold, so she agreed to stay and keep an eye on Quartz City while I go build something worth watching from a distance. As I left, I asked for 10,000 gold coins to fund the journey, and she joked that wasn't enough for one night with her. I said, how about a lifetime then? The sun went down, and the city's heart lit up like a carnival, because it was fight night at the underground arena, and I had a reputation to cash out. The place reeked of blood, sweat, stale beer, and desperation. You could taste the copper and violence in the air like the city's worst breakfast special. Down in the pit, a werewolf girl with blue hair and sharp claws was tearing into a big brute twice her size. Her name's Frostfang, and she's mine to protect. The crowd was screaming for her head. Not because she's a bad fighter, no, because she's a demi-human, and these fine folks treat her like trash with a pulse. I was in my private box getting a massage from two beast girls, one cat-eared and nervous, one fox-eared and skilled, when the match in the pit turned ugly. My cat-eared girl, yawing, flinched when the crowd started yelling slurs at Frostfang. And I get it, every word they spat was aimed at her too. Bai Ling, the fox girl, stepped in and took over the massage with skill that made my shoulders forget they had bones, and I watched the fight turn bloody. Frostfang ripped the big man's chest open with her claws, and the silence that followed was louder than the cheers that came after it. She won, against everything. The crowd turned on her in seconds. You damned beast, you cost me 2 gold coins, and the words hit her like a physical blow. I saw her shoulders drop. She walked into the dark tunnel, and I was already there, leaning on the wall like I had nothing better to do. Her tail started wagging like a golden retriever's. She tried to smile and say she was fine, but I can read her like a children's book. Nobody who hears that much hate walks away fine, not even a wolf. I just patted her head and told her to rest, and made a quiet promise to myself. The kingdom I build won't have room for people who judge by fur or blood. Then it was my turn. The host screamed my name, Shura, and the crowd lost its collective mind like they'd just heard the winning lottery numbers on live television. The announcer played it up, the mysterious rising swordsman, the one who comes from nowhere and leaves bodies behind. All that hype, aimed right at my mask. Then he dropped the real bomb. My opponent was Aitor, the Bloodhand Butcher, the arena's undisputed champion for 5 years straight, a 5th-tier warrior nearly 8 feet of muscle. That blood-red greatsword he carried wasn't red when he got it. It drank so much over the years that the steel just gave up and stayed that color. Charming guy. The crowd switched their loyalty in a heartbeat. They were screaming Shura 1 second, then Aitor the next, like fans switching teams when the star player gets traded. The gamblers were already placing bets on how long I'd last before I died. 3 minutes was generous. A minute was the smart money, and I was the entertainment. Smart money always loses when it doesn't know the whole story. But you know what? Let them bet against me. I've been the underdog since the day I was born. Over in a fancy booth, I caught a glimpse of a blonde girl, 12 years old, watching me with this sharp, studying look. That was Rosie, the Wilson family's golden child. She's the strongest genius the family has produced in a century, a wind mage with full energy from birth, and she thinks I'm someone worth figuring out. A noblewoman beside her assumed the girl bet on Aitor, but Rosie just stared at the stage. That little kid's got better instincts than half the drunks in this building. I stepped onto that blood-stained sand, and the roar hit me like a wave. Sweat, violence, and pure excitement all mixed into one heady, disgusting cocktail. The champion, 2.5 meters of scar tissue and bad intentions, stood across from me like a mountain that learned how to hate, and I felt a grin under my mask. Because here's the thing about being called worthless your whole life, it teaches you to appreciate a chance to prove the crowd wrong, even if the crowd could kill you. The bell rang, and the arena exploded. It was time to show these people what a waste of a Wilson surname could actually do with a sword and a dream. You want to know why I'm telling you all this? Because in 4 months, I'm going to be standing on soil no map has ever touched, building something from nothing but grit. And I'm taking that ripe fruit, a dead man's sword, and a family of beast girls who believe in me more than any blood relative ever did. That's the whole plan. Aitor charged, and that greatsword came down like it was trying to split the world in half. I sidestepped, and the sand where I stood exploded into a crater. The crowd screamed pure bloodlust, and I counted the rhythm. The big ones always telegraph. They swing big, they breathe loud, and they leave a window the size of my blade. I didn't charge, didn't rush. I let him swing and miss, and the crowd started getting restless, thinking I was just running from the inevitable. Their taunts didn't bother me. I was reading him, finding the gap in that guard, and when I found it, I was gonna make that 5-year reign end with one clean slash. Ader got sloppy, overextending on a swing that would have bisected 3 men standing in a row, and that's when my observation hockey sang like a dinner bell in my skull. I moved before he finished his arc, stepped inside his guard, and my blade came up under his ribs in a motion I've practiced 10,000 times, clean and final. He froze, that giant body going still like a statue realizing it's been sand, and I pulled the blade out, and he fell forward with a thud that shook the whole arena floor. Silence. Then a roar unlike anything I'd ever heard, 10,000 voices screaming Shura like it was a prayer and a battle cry and a love confession all at once. I stood there, mask on, blood on my cloak, and I realized that every insult I'd ever swallowed had just become fuel for a fire that was gonna burn real bright real soon. Rosie stood up in her booth, and I swear that 12-year-old was smiling at me like she'd just seen the future and liked what it looked like. Sharp kid. I walked off that stage with 10,000 gold coins, a town that worshipped my masked name, and a stack of enemies I didn't care about, because I was leaving in the morning. The Bloodhand Butcher fell tonight, and the worthless son officially died with him. Lox Zeke was just getting started, and the whole continent didn't know it yet. So I stepped out of that arena with 1,000,000 gold coins in my pocket, and it turns out, every greedy eye in Quartz City on my back. You'd think a guy who just killed a champion with one swing could walk home in peace, but no, not in this city. The streets smelled like piss and rotting fish, which is what passes for a red carpet when you're the guy who owns the gambling hall. 3 beast girls flanked me, Frostfang, Shadow and Bai Ling, each one ready to put their life on the line for me. And I'm not gonna lie, that trust was gonna be the difference between a good night and a shallow grave. We walked right into a dead end, which sounds stupid, but that was the whole plan. I needed them corralled. Frostfang, the wolf girl, sniffed the air and whispered that we had a tail. I told her to let them come. See, I've got this special observation hockey that picks up on people's emotions, not just their attacks. So I felt their greed before they even moved, felt their anger, felt the exact moment they decided I was an easy score. You ever walk into a bank in the middle of the day and just know the teller is about to do something stupid? That's what it was like walking through that dead end, except the teller was a crowd of armed murderers. I turned around and told them all to come out, and for a second, the silence was so deep you could hear the rats breathing. Nobody showed their face, so I showed them how this was gonna work. I blurred forward and took the first one's head off clean. The body hit the ground with a wet thud and the blood sprayed the alley wall, and I finally got their attention. One of them screams that they should all jump me at once because 1,000,000 gold is enough to split, and that's when the flood came. Fireballs, water jets, chunks of earth, bits of iron, all of it raining down the alley, screaming for my blood. You ever see a fireworks show where every single rocket is aimed at your face? That was the main event. So I spun that sword with armament hockey, wrapped around the blade like a black glove, and I turned into a goddamn blender. Every one of their spells got batted out of the air, and they stood there with their mouths open, wondering what just happened. Then their captain, the tactical genius he was, shouted for the warriors to form a wall, and I just walked through them. One backhand, one chest stab, every stroke a kill with absolutely no hesitation, because hesitation is what gets you shanked in this world. I was moving through them like a reaper, and the mages behind were screaming that they couldn't land a single hit on me. They called me a mudfish, which I don't think was a compliment, but honestly I'll take it. A mudfish lives to swim again. But here's the part where I look smart instead of just fast, because Roland, my perfume bottle woman, was already in play. The gaggle of idiots trying to run away suddenly felt dizzy, and that was her perfume fume fruit, emitting knockout scents in the air. My 3 beast girls, who are only 3rd tier, jumped in and cleaned up the poison trash while I handled the heavy hitters. 10 minutes later the alley was stained red with moonlight bouncing off the blood, and the only sounds left were dripping and breathing. Then this voluptuous woman in a purple dress strolled in, and my girls tensed up, ready to rip her apart. But Frostfang sniffed her and relaxed, saying she smelled like me, which is a sentence I'm still unpacking. Did you just assume your man is sharing his scent with every perfume vendor in the city? Because you'd be half right. Roland walked up and called me young master real casual, like she'd just popped out for milk and not to gas an alley full of corpses. She was one of mine, planted in the city for years, and tonight's ambush was exactly the kinda insurance I keep stashed around. We cleared out before Arthur and his dogs arrived. I didn't want that conversation. It was a lot, and it was only getting longer. The knights showed up with a mist hound and lost the trail, and Arthur quietly thought to himself that he was glad I'd gone. That man was a 6th-tier warrior, and he still didn't want a piece of me. Let me tell you, that's a compliment worth 1,000,000 gold. We ducked into Roland's shop, the Tulip Dream, which smells like a flower shop, and a bordello had a very well-funded baby. Bai Ling realized that Roland was one of my people, and Roland corrected her, saying she was actually my woman, and the girls turned to steam. I had blood all over me, so I asked Roland to scrub my back, and she asked me if we should go together, and I said sure. Now the three beast girls are standing there, eyes wide, watching two humans walk into a bathroom, and I think their senses just short-circuited. An hour later we came out, clean and recirculated, and the dinner table was set, so we sat down and I finally took off the mask. You should have seen their faces. I've been sure of the demon for years, and suddenly I'm an 18-year-old kid without a scar on him. Bai Ling said I was tender, which is a word I never wanted applied to me in my life, and I felt my eyebrow twitch. Frostfang and Shadow looked at me like I was a different person, and I realized the mask was a wall between me and all of them. So I told them I was 18, which is a year younger than Bai Ling, and that made her do the math out loud. She figured out that I was 14 when I started all this, and I saw the pity and the admiration cross her face in the same second. Roland covered for me, saying I'd grown up special, and I didn't correct her because that's a story for another night. We ate, and by ate I mean Frostfang and Shadow inhaled food like it was oxygen, and they'd been holding their breath for weeks. When I told them I was leaving Quartz City, they panicked, but then I said they were coming with me and the panic flipped to joy. I gotta make preparations, so they're staying with Roland for a few days, because their faces are known now and they'd get snatched up. The girls understood, nodded, and went to bed while I casually slung my arm around Roland and headed for the bedroom. And you know it's a good crew when the beast girls start whispering about whether the young master is gonna make a baby with the boss lady. Yuying, precious child that she is, says she's envious and wants one too, and Frostfang points out that humans and beastmen can't mate. Bai Ling, the voice of chaos, reassures them that the young master is different and that he just might not refuse. That's my girl. The door shut behind us, and the room smelled like tulips, and Roland asked me if I liked beast girls, and I said yes without a pause. Look, I'm a time traveler, not a eunuch, so I pushed her onto the bed and let the night handle the rest of that conversation. I woke up in a pool of purple sheets that smelled like a flower shop after a rain, and she was still asleep like I'd run her over. She knew we'd be separating soon, so she was trying to fit a month of nights into one, and I let her have it. I dressed, grabbed breakfast, and left the perfume shop, because a high-end store opening late doesn't raise any eyebrows. An hour later I was in the slums, where the air changed from perfume to sewage and the faces changed from rich to desperate. You ever wander into the part of town your landlord swore up and down was fine? This made that rental look like a palace. I found a crumbling house that had no business standing and knocked, and a freckled woman opened the door and asked me who I wanted. I said the name Shura, and her face lit up like I just told her she'd won the lottery, and she pulled me inside fast. That's Jenny, daughter of my science guy, and her excitement told me everything I needed to know about how much they trusted the mask. She led me down to a basement that was cleaner than the city above, like a laboratory from a sci-fi movie hidden under a crack den. Inside, a big-headed man with hair half black and half white was tinkering with something, and I knew enough not to interrupt his work. He suddenly shouted that ordinary people could create lightning, like he'd just solved world hunger, and I grinned because that's my doc. Hack, the brain fruit user, finally noticed me and got all excited, and I joked that his head was getting too big. He laughed. He told me he'd just cut it off later, and I thought about every mad scientist I'd ever heard of, and I hoped he was joking. I dropped a bag with 100,000 gold coins on the table, and told him to buy whatever materials he needed and get to work. Jenny gasped like I dropped a live grenade, and Hack clasped his hands and said I was generous, as if that was the whole point. I told him I wanted a territory, but I didn't want my living conditions to be worse than my slum hideout current situation. 3 hours later, I left that lab with a head full of plans that I didn't fully understand, but that were good enough for a genius to run with. I headed for the outskirts of the city, passed the border, and came to an inconspicuous valley that nobody important ever bothered to visit. Along the way I passed magical beasts, none high level, but each one was a friendly reminder that this world eats the unprepared. Then a group of riders on dragon-blooded horses blocked my path, scarred men with hard faces, and I knew them by their stance alone. A big burly guy at the front, a guy named Andre with a scar down his face, asked me who I was, and I put on the mask. His eyes went wide and that hard face broke into a grin because he recognized the Shura mask as the sign of his true master. Andre gave me his horse and he doubled up with the others, and we rode into the valley together, silent and ready. I told them it wasn't the place to talk, and the valley walls echoed with our hooves, like the world itself was waiting for orders. Inside that valley I now had 1,000,000 gold, a mad scientist, a perfume queen, 3 beast girls, and a crew of hard men waiting for orders. I'm building a kingdom from the slums up, and the only thing standing in my way is everyone who knows my name. The valley smelled like horse and fresh hay, which beat the city stink of rot and cheap perfume. I rode in wearing my Shura mask, and every freed slave I passed dropped what they were doing to Bo. 560-odd people called this border village home now, all of them bought out of chains with my coin. Andre had earned his contract back through service, but the rest still had to prove themselves before I tore theirs up. The pasture sat at the back of the village, and sprawling across its entrance was a tiger the size of a carriage. Blue and white fur like rolling waves, big folded wings like a blanket, and enough fourth-tier power to make my horse whine. "Boss," that thing stared at me with kill you eyes, and I stared right back because running wasn't an option. Then a sweet voice from somewhere behind it screamed something that sounded like a cat swearing, and the tiger went soft. A girl with pointed ears and emerald eyes rode up, scolding the beast like it was a disobedient house cat. Alice. My elf, my village manager, and the only person I trusted to run the whole operation without me breathing down her neck. She pulled a tiny dumpling from her cheek, and the giant tiger swallowed it like a dog catching a treat. That was her devil fruit, the dango fruit, turning wild beasts into loyal pets with nothing but a snack and a kind word. I could have eaten that fruit myself and never lost a fight again, but it fit her better than it ever fit me. We left the horses with Andre and walked to her cottage, where the air smelled of sun-dried tea leaves and clean linen. I took the mask off and she went quiet, and then she told me I was way younger than she ever pictured. I poured the numbers out like I was reading a bank statement, and she didn't blink once at the scale of it. 654 people, 7 third-tier warriors, and enough magical beasts to field a small army if it came to that. 4 years of feeding this village, 4 years of devil fruits handed out to slaves nobody else wanted, and it finally meant something. I told her we were moving in a few days, and she just nodded and said okay without asking a single question. You gotta understand, that loyalty came from the contracts in my pocket, but it felt real anyway. The next morning I told her about getting booted from the Wilson family and stripped of my name, and her face went red with fury. Alice swore for the first time in her life, calling them idiots, and I swear I loved that girl a little more. She said she'd follow me anywhere, and I pinched her cheek until her whole face glowed like a lantern. That settled, I rode back to Quartz City and slipped into Tulip Dream House through the back door like a man with something to hide. Soon as the door opened, a little black blur tackled me, Ewing wrapped around me like a koala that missed me desperately. I asked if her reading was coming along and she slid off me like I just told her the puppy died. Frostfang was on the couch with a book open, apparently studying hard, though I heard soft snoring before I saw her face. She was fast asleep with her eyes open, the werewolf girl, and Bai Ling came out of the bath and brushed her tail across Frostfang's cheek. Frostfang woke up swinging and asked who touched her, and then remembered I was home and went sheepish as a lamb. Roland had dinner waiting, and over the stew she asked where I planned to plant this new flag of mine. South, through the misty forest, all the way to the sea, I told her, and she nodded like a general approving a battle plan. The misty forest gave us a natural wall against the Empire, and the ocean would give us a highway they couldn't police. Roland warned me about pirates hitting coastal towns, and I told her not to worry, because nobody pirates harder than I do. That night she was extra eager, pulling every trick noble ladies whisper about, and I let her think she won. I got taught by professionals, so she surrendered fast, and I held back just enough that she could stand in the morning. For a week I ran between city and valley, preparing our escape, and I passed every night with Roland until she could barely walk. On the last morning she helped me dress, kissed me slow, and told me she'd be waiting when I came back. After I left she put a hand on her belly, hoping all those nights had taken root, and I know that hope was real. I walked out with Frostfang, Shadow and Bai Ling in cloaks, heading south to collect Doc Hack and Jenny from the poor quarter. We hit a wall of people before we got there. The whole street stopped and staring at some noble procession. Center of it, Rosie of the Wilson family rode a gale deer, a third-tier beast gifted by her 8th-tier mage teacher. The crowd was buzzing about her future, and I was about to walk past when a voice cut through all of it. Z Kai, from the group, rode out a short-haired blonde on a yellow warhorse, looking like a man with a grudge. Nate. The rumor mill said I scared him into fainting, and he wanted to wash that shame off in public. He rode up to me and met my eyes and stopped dead, and his hands started sweating on the rifle he carried. I told my people to walk on and he screamed at me to stop again, and I kept walking like he was traffic. Then he shouted that I'd live in the poor street forever, just like my mother, and that hit the wrong nerve. I turned around and let a flash of red lightning roll through my eyes. Conqueror's haki aimed at nobody but him. The pressure hit him like a collapsing wall, his eyes glazed white, and he toppled off his horse and cracked his head on the ground. The crowd saw me glare and him faint and decided he was just a coward, which was so much easier than the truth. Rosie stared at my back and felt something familiar, thought the word Shura, and then shook it off completely. Because everyone knows a good-for-nothing with no vital energy can't be the masked terror from the arena. Meanwhile, Nate's reputation as Quartz City's biggest coward just took over mine, and I'm not even mad about it. We slipped through the alleys to Doc Hack's door and Jenny opened it, bright-eyed and ready to go. Hack came out with a pack bigger than he was, and he smiled like a man finally leaving jail to go study something fun. We marched out of Quartz City and no one stopped us, because the people who mattered didn't know we were leaving at all. On the outskirts, Alice dropped out of the sky on that winged tiger and Frostfang, and Shadow jumped in front of me with teeth out. I pushed both their heads down and told them she was one of us, and Alice hopped off to say hello like it was a picnic. Hack circled the tiger like a kid at a zoo, and Alice fed it a dumpling and explained the devil fruit did all the taming. Yoing ate one of those dumplings and went full eyes wide and hands on for Alice, suddenly her best friend in the world. Hack asked for a vial of Alice's blood for research, and she gave him a look that said she had questions about him. I explained he was a scientist, and she handed it over, probably deciding her blood was a fair trade for joining a winning team. Then Andre came into view with over 600 people, the whole village moving as one, and it was time to go. Alice offered us a ride, Frostfang and Ewing both said they couldn't ride horses, and the tiger whined like a spoiled cat. Alice bribed the beast with a dumpling and suddenly we had 4 seats on a flying tiger, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say. Hack rode one dragonblood horse with Jenny, and the formation stretched out, civilians in the middle and warriors on the flanks. I sat on the tiger's back and pushed my observation hockey out full, mapping every threat in the mist before it even saw us. The misty forest is said to be a dragon's sleeping breath, and I wasn't about to test that rumor with 600 people behind me. For the first leg, the tiger's presence scared off the smaller beasts, and we moved clean through the light fog. Yoing kept glancing west like she wanted to say something, and Frostfang noticed and called her out on it. I asked her what was wrong and she finally admitted it. She wanted to go home and visit her family. Turns out her home was Moon Canyon, west in the misty forest, and I'd never known that about her in all our years together. I told her we'd go take a look and she kissed my cheek fast, then I turned the tiger and headed west. Nobody in the column asked why the direction changed, which is the kinda trust you can't buy. Frostfang and Alice watched Ewing's excitement with a little envy in their eyes, and I caught it with my special hockey. Frostfang said her home was Wolffang territory, way north between the Sunset Empire and the Eagle Empire's border. I promised her we'd go when we had a fleet, and she showed me those little fangs in a smile. Alice said her home was the central continent across a vast ocean, and she'd been away from it so long she didn't even know. I made her a vow that one day I'd take her home too, and she tilted her head, smiled, and said nothing but yes. 5 hours west and the fog thinned out, and Ewing shouted that she knew this place. Moon Canyon was close. She was bouncing on the tiger like a kid who sees the water park, and then I went cold and told her to stop. There's a large-scale battle ahead, I said. Ewing went pale and told me about the kobold tribe and the goblin tribe. Those two had been raiding her people for food and weapons, and the cat tribe had never once pushed back. I patted her head and told her to leave it to me, which is what I always say before I do something reckless. I stood up on the tiger and yelled at Andre to guard the civilians while the warriors followed me to reinforce the cat tribe. Andre reorganized the whole formation in 3 minutes, because that's what a knight commander who knows his job does. I drew the Sandai Kitetsu, pointed it at the battle, and the winged tiger took off with warriors thundering behind us on dragonblood horses. We were still a few minutes out when that pressure hit, and half the kobold lines just dropped. The ones still standing tumbled down the hillside like 10-pin bowling, which was honestly kinda impressive. Those dog-headed idiots never knew what hit them, and neither did the goblins on the high ground. Their chief tried to crank a catapult around and chuck a boulder at me, which was adorable and futile. One arc blade later and he was confetti, so his boys did what cowards do and scattered in every direction. Shadow dropped out of the sky behind them, and Frostfang followed, claws cold enough to freeze a man solid. Andre had already sealed the valley mouth with his knights, and the whole thing turned into a slaughter in minutes. That man turned into a black bear mid-charge and impaled a second-tier kobold on his spear like it was nothing. Half an hour of that, and the only survivors were the ones smart enough to dig tunnels and run. The cat people were staring at us like we'd dropped from heaven, and honestly I couldn't blame them. Then one of their warriors shouted Shadow's name and I realized we'd found exactly who we came for. Her father, Night Owl, had a jaw on the ground that could have caught a small bird. She jumped off that winged tiger straight into her mother's arms, and the two of them just held each other. You've seen family reunions at airport arrivals, right, where people cry into each other's necks for 10 minutes? Well, imagine that, with ears and a tail, and a whole tribe watching, and it still hits just as hard. Then she pulled away, grabbed my arm, and announced to her folks that I was her young master. You should have seen those two faces. Her dad looked ready to carve me into a trophy. I got in first, told them that she was family, not property, and the whole room exhaled at once. To be fair, I had saved her from a slave market and given her a home, so the pitch wasn't hard. By nightfall they were hosting a bonfire for us, slaughtering sheep and breaking out every barrel they owned. That place smelled like wood smoke and roasting meat, and the ale flowed like it was going out of style. Andre was in his element, getting hammered with the cat warriors and trading stories about the battle. One of the cat women asked him how a human could turn into a bear, and his drunk answer was priceless. He said I wasn't an ordinary person, which was code for something godly, and the whole tribe went quiet. I wasn't there to correct him. Turns out a reputation like that opens a lot of doors, you know? The old chief, a white-haired cat named Darkness, pulled me aside to talk while the party raged on. He was the 4th-tier warrior who got crippled in that beast fight, and he knew his time was short. His body was failing, and the moment he died the tribe would have nobody left above 3rd tier. That's a death sentence out here, so he asked me, a human, to become their new chieftain. I told him I was still human, and he waved that off like it was nothing but a formality. He said just marry Yueying and take charge, and nobody in the tribe would dare to object. Yueying's face went red as a fire hydrant, and she looked at me like I was the winning lottery ticket. I had to think fast, 'cause marrying her right there was a yes to staying in that canyon forever. So I told him we were headed south through the misty forest to find new land, and staying was impossible. The disappointment on his face was real, and Yueying's was even worse, which honestly stung a little. But then I said the tribe could come with us, if he was willing, and the whole table went back to breathing. He said he needed the night to talk it over, so I nodded and got back to the serious business of eating. The meat was plain but plentiful, and my appetite burns through anything after a day of using haki. The party ran until nearly midnight before they dragged me to a cabin, and I crashed hard into that bed. I don't know if it was the drink or the day catching up, but I remember a warm little thing crawling in beside me. Morning came and there was a furry tail in my fist, and Yueying's head on my chest, looking very pleased. She announced that she wanted to become my woman, and at 18 with that kinda enthusiasm, who was I to argue? Look, the details are mine, but the short version is that kid walked out of there with a real spring in her step. She was a 3rd-tier warrior, so she could handle things way better than Roland ever did, and I made sure of that. We had travel days ahead of us, so I kept it gentle, but the girl had zero complaints about the arrangement. Her mother had breakfast waiting, simple bread with jam, and I was starving enough to eat the whole table. Frostfang, the sister, stuck her nose in the air like a bloodhound and sniffed Shadow out immediately. She announced that Shadow smelled like me, and then made it worse by saying she smelled like Roland too. Bailing, one of the older girls, laughed and said that wasn't Roland's scent, it was my scent on top of Roland. Alice went beet red and spat at me, which was ironic considering, and Shadow wanted the floor to swallow her. Frostfang got the whole story out of her sister and declared she was taking the initiative herself tonight. That girl had zero shame about it, and honestly I respected the direct approach, but we had work to do first. I found Andre drilling the knights at dawn, and those boys sobered up fast the moment I walked over. I told them to sit down and save their strength, because we had traveled the next few days and no time for gym class. Then I asked for the battle tally from yesterday, and he pulled out a yellow paper written in neat hand. That man could read, which is why he was captain, and the list had one name that made me stop cold. A knight named Carl had killed a 3rd-tier kobold across tiers and 12 2nd-tier ones on top of that. That kinda combat talent is rare, and I needed to see the man behind that number with my own 2 eyes. He came forward, a thin guy among all those brutes, and I spotted a noble's bearing under the grime. I asked if he could read, and he nodded, so I put him through a full background check right there. Turned out he was a fallen young noble, chased out by enemies and sold down to the slave market. I read his emotions while we talked, and the loyalty in him was real, so I made my call. I pulled out a devil fruit with a spiral pattern and handed it over as a reward for his work. The knights around us went quiet, because they knew exactly what that fruit meant, a whole new life. His eyes went from worry to relief, and he dropped to one knee swearing his life to my service. He took a big bite, and his face twisted up like he'd bitten into a lemon wrapped in battery acid. The knights who'd already eaten their devil fruits started laughing, because they knew that taste personally. One bite is all you need, but I've never once told them that, because the struggle builds character. No wait, that's a lie. It's mostly because watching grown men eat a whole cursed fruit is funny. Carl finished the ugly thing anyway, then stepped into the open field to test his new power. His body swelled up to the size of a 2-story house, all rough scales and teeth like butcher knives. He roared, and the knights shouted that it was a dragon, an earth dragon, and I had to correct them. I told them it was a tyrannosaurus, and nobody knew what that was, but it had dragon in name. So they treated him like a god, which is exactly the reaction I wanted from the rest of the company. Carl turned back, bowed again, and I left him to the questions before the boys mobbed him for details. By noon the old chief found me again, and this time he had the whole tribe's answer ready to go. They were willing to pack up and come with us, which was great news, because a territory needs people. I told him everyone who joined would be equal to humans, which is a promise I plan to keep. He let out a breath he'd probably been holding all night, thanked me, and went off to start the packing. I went to find Alice, who'd been out scouting the enemy tribes all morning with her tamed beasts. She came back with a report. The goblins had fled into the deep misty forest overnight, the smart cowards. But the kobolds had stayed put, defenses unchanged, because they're too stupid to run from anything. Their cave was probably stuffed with rare ore and gold from all that digging, so I wasn't passing it up. I sent Alice to tell Andre to hit them that afternoon, because a third-tier chief was below my pay grade. The knights took that order like kids getting told there's pizza at the end of the school day. Inside the cave, a few third-tier kobolds were arguing about whether to run or to hold their ground. One of them was smart enough to ask if anyone else felt the ground shaking, right before the screams started. In came Carl in full tyrannosaur form, blocking javelins with his hide like they were toothpicks. He smashed the fence into the kobold ranks and turned a cluster of them into a red paste on the dirt. Andre charged in as a black bear on horseback and just plowed straight through their defensive line. The knights followed like hungry wolves, shouting about who'd get credit for the most kills this time. That cave smelled like iron and blood, and the ugly part is I found that combination deeply satisfying. A smart kobold tried to organize a shield wall at the cave mouth, and I'll admit it was a decent idea. But decent don't beat a dinosaur, and Carl just stood in front of the javelin rain while the knights flanked. Andre singled out the commander, spurred his horse over the rank and file, and put a spear through its skull. The other 3 third-tier kobolds panicked, and when even their god wouldn't help. Whole morning on that little boat, and the sea had that clean salt smell you only get when nobody's died on it recently. 2.5 hours of waiting, I figured, for treasure. The rod was cheap and the line kept tangling, but that's the price of the best fishing spot. Half an hour in, the float sank, and up came a rotten chest that smelled like a swamp. I didn't crack it open, just tossed it in the hull and kept the line moving, one more, then another. 3 chests total, and when the world blinked me back, I had that grin of a man who just won. The long one held a black scabbard, and the text called it Snow Walk, which is a sword. The blade came out white as clean snow and honestly gorgeous, but I don't do the 3-sword circus. 1 blade done right beats 3 done sloppy, so she went into storage next to Kitetsu. The second chest had the giraffe fruit, a plain zoan, which is a beast-shifting deal, and that one I saved. Handing that to a knight turned some farm kid into a living battering ram overnight, so it's bank. The third chest held 3 bananas, white and purple with spirals, and my gut already knew what they were. The cut fruit, Paramecia class, and my first thought was Frostfang, because those claws plus blades, that's a whole new kinda trouble. The invisibility one I'd caught earlier goes to Shadow instead. Bai Ling waits for the perfect match, nothing wrong with that, some things are worth the patience. Back in the room, the tribe was packing, and that chaos has a sound 100 paws on wood floors. Alice appeared with a notebook, my head housekeeper now, and she reported the numbers in that steady elf voice. 236 cat people total, 1 4th-tier fighter, 8 3rd-tier, and that's just the top shelf. 21 at 2nd tier and 53 at 1st, and the ratio tells you what their life costs. Basically every adult cat can fight, which is their gift, and the bill for that gift is the brains. You won't find a cat scholar writing treatises, but you will find a cat holding a line against worse odds. I patted her head and she pouted about her growth, which is rich, since I'm the one feeding her. Frostfang and Shadow were in the lake catching fish, and you could hear the kids cheering from the shore. The kids were screaming that the girls beat their dads at fishing, which had both of them showing off. Frostfang sniffed me out from the water and jumped on me, soaking my shirt, and that's just her greeting. Shadow came up behind me quiet as a held breath, and I still don't know how she does that on land. The chieftain said leave the lake fish or lose them, so the girls were draining the whole thing by hand. I told them I had a faster way, and a little cat kid asked if I could beat the sisters at fishing. I said I'm not faster at catching fish, but I know a trick that skips the catching part entirely. They stepped back, all those eyes on me, and I walked to the shore with that showman's little grin. The conqueror's hockey hit the water like a brick through a window, and the lake went still in a heartbeat. Black and red lightning crawled across the surface, and space itself seemed to bend for a second there. Then the fish floated up, hundreds of them bellies up, and you could hear the kids lose their minds. The 2 beast girls just stared like I'd turned the lake into a pantry, which, to be fair, I kinda had. Yuing asked if she could learn the trick, and I told her no, which landed on her like a slammed door. I saw the disappointment in both their eyes, and I get it, because wanting to be stronger is its own hunger. So I pulled out the 2 devil fruits and told them the trade, power for a bite of something truly foul. They'd seen what Alice could do with her fruit, and that sold them harder than any speech I could give. Then I remembered something important: the whole seawater weakness might not even exist in this world. In my old world, sea stone in the water cripples fruit users, but I've never heard of sea stone here. That might mean a devil fruit is just pure upgrade with no downside, which is the best news I've had all week. I told them they might fear the ocean, and they looked at me like I'd said they'd fear the moon. Frostfang said the sea is far away, and she'd eat a rock if it made her strong, and I believe her. I explained the cut fruit turns your whole body into blades, and invisibility makes you the air itself. They started bowing to each other, each one wanting the other to choose first, so I made the call myself. Frostfang's wild fighting style gets blades, and Shadow's a ghost anyway, so she gets to become an actual ghost. They grabbed the fruit and bit in, and the faces they made, that was exactly the show I was hoping for. Yuying said it tasted worse than my cooking, and I let that slide, since the girl isn't wrong. I told them they'd get used to it, which is a lie, and they swallowed the rest through sheer determination. Frostfang's fruit came as 3 bananas, and watching her choke those down was a comedy nobody paid for. She said she'd fight to be stronger and shoved them all in, and her cheeks puffed out like a squirrel's. I knew one bite was enough, but where's the fun in letting them off easy? Call it a character flaw. Shadow vanished, clothes and all, and Frostfang's fingers turned into knives that gleamed like a threat. I spent that whole afternoon running them through drills, because power you can't aim is just a liability. The cat people heard about the fish and came running, and Andre's stories had them treating me like a god. Doc Hack proved he's worth his weight by teaching them smoked fish, which they'd never even heard of. That man read every book in Quartz City, and knowing how to cure fish is the least weird thing about him. Night came and Bai Ling found me with a towel, and she asked if I'd eaten, gentle as an older sister. I told her I don't have a fruit for her yet, and she just smiled and said she'd wait, no pressure. Andre led the knights back loaded with kobold loot, and their horses kicked up dust you could taste. They'd routed the kobolds clean, and what they couldn't carry they left behind, which I can't fault them for. The goblins ran before they got there, leaving scrap and traps, and the goblins themselves were gone. I set the bounties then and there: a silver for a first-tier kill, 10 for second, a gold for third tier. Andre shouted long live the young master, and the whole yard echoed it, and that sound pays better than coin. We had a fish feast and I got properly drunk, because occasionally you want the world to get fuzzy. My observation hockey's set to wake me if something real shows up, so I can afford the hangover. Frostfang, sharp girl, noticed I was sleepy and offered to walk me back, and I let her take my arm. She led me into her room, and the night wind through the wood slats was the kinda cold that bites. She asked if I was hot, and I nodded, because she was right, the room did feel warm all of a sudden. She fumbled with the knots, clumsy as a newborn foal, and I decided I wasn't teaching tonight. Then she sniffed the air and called out Shadow's name, and that sent a little thrill through the room. Shadow had been invisible in the corner the whole time, and Frostfang's nose caught her anyway. Good dog, I mean cat. Frostfang chased her down and made her stay to teach, and I just watched, impressed by the teamwork. Next morning I woke up refreshed and told myself, fine, we leave tomorrow, today I go sharpen the blade. I headed alone into the misty forest, because that fog is the best gym for observation hockey you'll ever find. An hour in, I found a purple serpent the size of a train car, gnawing on a red bull like a snack. That's the purple abyss serpent, 6th tier, venom so strong it melts steel, and it sensed me watching. It dropped the bull and came at me, and the ground shook with every coil, and the smell was pure rot. I drew Kitetsu, jumped off that branch and closed my eyes, which any sane person would call suicide. I needed to force my observation hockey to grow, and there's no better teacher than the threat of death. I did a midair backflip past its jaws and landed on its skull, and the blade started its bloody work. Blood prison wheel slash armament hockey coated steel, spinning like a top and painting the snake red. It screamed and thrashed, and my feet barely kept me on, and the air filled with venom and fury in me. I used the moonwalk trick, a weak version anyway, to step on air and dodge the worst of what it threw. It spat venom like arrows and I spun a storm out of sword energy, and the poison died against that wall. We locked blades against its fang, and its tail caught me in the ribs, and I went flying through the trees. I got up, spat some blood, and told myself that hit just meant I had the right idea about training. 2 hours of that dance, and then its head hit the ground, and I opened my eyes for the first time all fight. I was wearing venom and gore like a second skin, but the armament hockey had kept the real damage off. The forest around us was wrecked, trees down, the ground torn, and the fog hid most of the carnage, so you're welcome. I checked my panel and there it was. Observation hockey had leveled from proficient all the way to master. 2 years stuck on that plateau, and 1 near-death spar with a murder snake cracked it wide open. That puts me at strongest of the 6th rank, and I can trade with weaker 7th tier monsters and win. I dragged the snake's halves back to the canyon, and the fog swallowed me 100 times along the way. Alice was feeding the winged tiger, and that thing ate fish like I eat popcorn, which is a lot of popcorn. It smelled the snake before I cleared the mist, and its eyes locked on the corpse with pure, hungry greed. I cut off the tail and tossed it over, and the winged tiger nearly licked me clean off my feet trying to thank me. I told it only Alice gets to lick me, and she went red as a rose and ran off, which made my whole day. That snake meat goes to Frostfang and Shadow tonight, and I finally get to taste 6th-tier beast for myself. So the day ended with a full belly, a sharper blade, and 2 girls who can turn invisible and cut air. Not bad for a fishing trip, and the best part is, I didn't gotta leave the canyon to find a fight. So I'm hauling a 6th-tier snake the size of a house back to camp, and the whole cat people tribe just stops and stares. A kid asks if it's 4th tier, and an old catman corrects him that's a purple abyss serpent 6th tier. The old patriarch Aming gives me a whole new look. He finally realizes he bet on a 6th-tier expert. And for these people that meant something, cause they'd never once eaten meat that strong, not even close. I tossed the corpse down and told them it was our last meal in the canyon, and you shoulda heard 'em cheer. They're all shouting long live the young master, which felt like a lot for a guy who just caught dinner. But the snake's poisonous, so I didn't slice it up myself. I dragged Hack over to play walking encyclopedia. That man knows everything. And I mean everything, which is useful when your supper could kill the whole crew. The meat was packed with energy too, perfect for me since I need flesh and blood more than any Yuan Qi. After that, one more night in the canyon, then we moved out at dawn with 200 extra souls. Lem tell ya, herding that many people through a misty forest is like trying to move a whole town, no. Little White and Alice lined everyone up, while I woke up with both beast girls latched onto my arms. I hadn't gone crazy last night, honest, but now they were sleeping in like they'd worked a double shift. Bai Ling said we'd be ready in an hour, so I did a quick inspection and gave her the nod. Frostfang, Shadow, Alice and me rode the winged tiger up front, while Andre and the others flanked the line. With my observation hockey sweeping ahead, we dodged anything rank 6 or higher, smooth sailing for 5 days. Then the fog got thick, real thick enough you could chew it, and we slowed to a crawl. I kept scanning ahead, and then it hit me, a suffocating pressure that made me drop hockey like a hot pan. I was gasping, sweating, heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon, and Alice was already asking if I was okay. I told her I was fine and had the team rest, but my eyes stayed locked on the mist's deep heart. Something in there was big enough to make my instincts scream, and I didn't need a second look to know it. Deep in that fog, a golden vertical pupil opened, huge as a door, and it knew someone was watching. It rose up, a body like a western dragon, and one stretch of its wings kicked up a cyclone big enough to flatten trees. Then it just lay back down. All that terror was just the thing yawning. Can you believe that? Its breathing alone made those twin streams of white air, and I felt that in my chest from miles away. I never saw the dragon, but I knew enough to cut my hockey range in half and keep my head down. 7 more days of that, creeping along, and then the fog just thinned out and sunlight hit our faces. Shadow got so excited she shouted, and I rubbed her head like a proud dad. We were finally out. Everyone was cheering and stretching in the sun like they'd been in prison, and honestly, I felt the same way myself. If I hadn't had those beast girls to mess with, I'd have gone stir crazy, but I got through it. I had Alice set up camp and sent Andre with a few knights to scout for any human settlements in the area. They came back at dinner with a map and good news, a big river nearby, and if we followed it, we'd find folks. That night I told the girls I needed a bath, and they were more eager than me, which told me a lot. See, the winged tiger was a tigress, so the whole group had been living on top of a lady this whole time. We rode her to the river, and the lake was calm, reflecting a couple of full moons like a painting. I sat in the shallows like some kinda open-air bath, while Frostfang and Shadow played in the deep end. Bai Ling offered to rub my back, and I said sure, not thinking about my complete lack of a towel. That woman is a fox, literally, and she showed me exactly how a fox scrubs a back without one. Alice's long ears went so red you could light a campfire off them, and Jenny was teasing her about it. Alice blamed the cold lake water, and Jenny, bless her, just let the lie go and started humming a tune. 10 minutes of that, and my back was raw, but I wasn't gonna complain. She was enjoying herself too much. Then my eyes snapped open, cause my hockey picked up a presence floating down the river, and I told him we had company. Everyone looked at the flat banks and said nothing was there, but Bai Ling, sharp as always, asked if it was in the water. I jumped in, grabbed a body, and hauled it ashore, a scrawny little thing in rags, thin as a rail. Jenny checked the kid's breathing and started CPR, the whole routine, water out, foreign objects gone, chest compressions right. 3 minutes later, the kid's eyes opened, and the first word out of her mouth was hungry. I already knew she was a girl, so I had Frostfang carry her, and we rode back to camp for some real food. By the campfire she was sipping rice porridge, tears streaming down her face, drinking it slower than a dying man's last wish. Jenny told her there was plenty. And the girl said thank you in a voice that broke your heart a little. I handed her some fish soup, and that's when the dam broke. She just burst into tears right there. My haki told me it was all real, genuine feeling, so I just sat with her till she calmed down. Her name was Little Fish, and she told me a story that made me want to burn a whole territory down. She came from Twilight Forest, a poor place upstream with 2,000 souls and no knights to speak of. Every year, the lizardmen across the river demanded children as tribute, or they'd slaughter the entire human town. The Lord handed her over with the other kids, and she only escaped because rotting corpses attacked the convoy. Shadow was furious, saying they weren't fit to be lords, and I felt cold iron settle in my chest, you know? These lizardmen were treating people like livestock, and I added every last one of them to my kill list. Now here's the thing, and you're gonna call me crazy, but I decided I wasn't gonna build from scratch anymore. Since some territory couldn't protect its own, I was gonna take the damn thing over and do it myself. Next morning we followed the river 3 hours, and the landscape got grim, dead trees and gray stone houses. An old castle sat on a hillside, and just looking at it, I felt the poverty rolling off it like a smell. I left Bai Ling with the tribe, took Andre and 15 knights, and rode the tiger straight into the deadwood. Little Fish looked at me like I was insane, cause in her world, nobody just takes in an orphan out of kindness. There was a wooden fence with a dozen guards in rusty armor, jaw-dropping at the sight of a tamed beast. One of them said he'd rather block a flood than try to stop us, and honestly, that's the smartest thing I heard all week. Their leader, Gerson, came up with this greasy smile, ready to open the gates before I even asked for anything. I told him I was here to take the Lord's place, and that man switched sides faster than a cat on a hot stove. Shadow was stunned, asking why the Lord's own subordinate would betray him so easily, and Gerson just started ranting. Turns out Lord Dan was a lecherous pig who taxed everyone dry and fed children to lizardmen every year. Gerson was practically spitting with rage, saying if not for the armed knights, they'd have rebelled long ago. I watched him perform, and I could tell he was testing me, so I just said lead the way and let him squirm. We headed to the castle on the hill, and I felt eyes on me from the second floor. Dan was watching. I looked up and caught his panicked eyes, and that's when I gave Shadow a single word, nothing more. She went up through a window, grabbed the Lord, punched him in the gut, and threw him off the second floor. His own knight commander tried to rush to his aid, and Andre put a spear through his calf without breaking a sweat. That iron-plated fool hit the ground, and the rest of the knights threw down their weapons, kneeling in the dirt. I walked up to Dan, who was squirming backward on his fat ass, and told him my name slow and clear. He offered to help me in any way, all smiles and sweat, but my haki could feel the hatred underneath the words. So I smiled back and asked if he'd really help with anything, and he said yes, real eager, swallowing the bait. My smile vanished. I told him I'd borrow his life, and hit him with a pressure that knocked him out cold. His knight commander lunged again, and Andre stomped him flat, while Gerson started singing like a canary. The knight commander had helped Dan abduct women and hand the unwilling to lizardmen, so he wasn't innocent either. I gave Gerson a look, decided he had potential, and had him rally every villager to the mountainside. An hour later, the gaunt people stood there, numb and lifeless, while Andre dropped a gallows with a heavy thud. They started murmuring, wondering what Lord Dan wanted now, and then they saw him tied up on a red horse struggling. Gerson gave a speech that got them riled up, real quick-witted for an illiterate man. I gotta hand him that. I stepped forward and told him I was the new master, no more tribute, no more fear, and I'd fight the lizardmen myself. I renamed the place Dawn Territory, and watched Dan hang until his face went pale, knowing this was just the start. So we finally had a castle that didn't feel like a borrowed coffin, and I set up shop in the map room. First thing I learned is that my little slice of the world is wedged between a swamp full of monsters and mountains. The lizardmen own the swamp, and nobody's walked deep enough in there to map what else breathes in it. East of the river, 5 human territories squat between the mountains, and I just took one of the 5. Winning the other 4 would have been easy, but you can't rule land with 30 loyal killers and a dream. So the plan was simple: settle in, build up, and try not to choke on the air while I did it. The stench outside that place hit me like a wet sock, and you know I've smelled some things. Pure, untreated human waste, baking in the sun for who knows how long, and I nearly gagged on my own ambition. I told Hack the first priority is toilets, cause that smell breeds disease, and disease eats territory from inside. He laughed that old man laugh and said I'd get used to it if I'd lived on Poor Man's Street longer. My guy, I'm from New York, I've seen worse, but that doesn't mean I want to live in a sewer. The locals kept kneeling every time I walked past, and I let them, because fear buys you time in the beginning. By evening, Alice came back from her survey, and the news was simple: we've got a goblin tribe as neighbors. They're numerous, which is a problem, but there's nobody above the 4th rank, which is an opportunity. I told her we're not keeping goblins, those things aren't people, they're a plague with feet and bad posture. We'll drive them out or kill them, whichever comes first, and Andre starts recruiting tomorrow. Then I said something stupid like, let's go wash up and have dinner, and Alice's ears went full crimson. She thought I meant together, and honestly, I could have corrected her, but I figured, why ruin a good misunderstanding? That castle bath was the size of my old apartment, and the steam made the whole room feel like a dream. We leaned on each other and did nothing at all, and for a second, I forgot I was running from death. She asked if this was home now, and I told her no, we're tearing this castle down eventually and rebuilding better. She looked disappointed for a half second, then I said she could design the rooms however she wanted. You should have seen her face, that girl went from crushed to glowing like someone just gave her a puppy. Then I asked her to scrub my back, and whatever that cult taught her, it was definitely not standard backwashing technique. I was sitting there thinking, this is the life a transmigrator should have, when the door slammed open wide. Yoing burst in and cannonballed straight into the tub, soaking everything, and Frostfang followed right behind her. 2 more bodies hit that water and suddenly my peaceful bath was a public pool with fur and claws. Alice tried to run off in the chaos, but I grabbed her and said, now it's my turn to wash you. Her ears turned so red you could have used them as a warning beacon, and I enjoyed every second of that. Next morning I woke up feeling fresh, and there she was squinting, doing the worst fake sleep impression I've ever seen. My observation hockey told me she was awake, and her twitching eyebrows were backup proof, so I got to work. I started messing with her, and those long ears betrayed her completely, red-hot iron by the time I stopped. The second I closed the door behind me, she yanked the blanket over her head, and I heard her squeak from the hallway. Meanwhile, I had bigger fish to fry, so I found Andre and told him we're building an army from scratch. I pulled out this awakening stone that cost me 100,000 gold coins, which isn't Monopoly money. That's a fortune that could feed a small town for a year, and I dropped it on a rock that tells you if you're talented. Fun fact, the universe has a 5-tier grading system for magical talent: low, average, good, advanced, and perfect. Average and up means you can learn to fight like a warrior, but only advanced and above means you can be a mage. So mages are rarer than hen's teeth, because you need that top 2% just to light a candle properly. Gerson, this peasant kid with a face like a kicked puppy, asked if he could try, and I said sure, why not? He put his hand on the stone, and it lit up bright green, and Andre nearly swallowed his own tongue in shock. High-level wood aptitude, which means this skinny kid who never held a sword is a natural-born mage. Gerson composed himself, put on a humble face, and swore to serve me to the death, but I saw the grin underneath. That guy's a politician in a peasant's body, and honestly, I respect the hustle, so I told him to gather everyone. He left nearly skipping, probably dreaming of magic missiles and an official title, and I handed him the recruitment drive. 2 hours later we had half the mountain lined up, every farmer and laborer hoping to discover they're secretly a hero. Gerson got handed the testing duties and immediately realized he had no idea what the colors meant, classic overreach. Andre took over, and the verdicts came down one after another: low aptitude next, ordinary at best. You should have seen their faces, each one hoping for a miracle, each one walking away with a shrug and a defeated back. 1,000 people tested, and 137 made the cut, only about 20 of those with real talent. That's a 13% hit rate, which in baseball terms means you're swinging at almost every pitch and missing. Gerson walked around puffed up like a rooster, because he was one of the 1 in a million, and he knew it. The ones who didn't make it went back to building the town, and the ones who did got handed weapons and a bedroll. That night I gathered the commanders around the table, and started slicing up the army into actual fighting units. We got 41 Dragonblood horses, which is just enough for 1 proper cavalry battalion, and Andre gets those. Shadow gets the scouts, the cat people who can go invisible and hear your heartbeat from across the street. Infantry splits 3 ways. Carl leads the Wild Tyrant, Frostfang leads the Frost, and the patrol guards home. Hack's been fixing up that old man, and now he's fit enough to hold a shield line, which is good, we need the bodies. A month after that meeting, the territory looks like an actual place, crops growing, walls rising, water flowing right. Hack is some kinda territorial savant, dead trees cleared, streets laid out, and the place smells like bread instead of corpses. Shadow took 50 scouts through the mountain and came back with intel on the Goblin tribe, and man, did I want to wash my brain. Their camp is a nightmare, women of every race kept as breeding stock, eyes empty, souls long gone, and it made my blood cold. Shadow watched it all from invisible, cataloged every trap and sentry and weakness while keeping her fury locked down tight. She's got more discipline than I do, because I'd have burned that place down the second I saw what they were doing. I called the commanders that night and said, the training wheels come off, these recruits need to see blood before they forget what war is. We left at dawn, 300 soldiers against at least 10,000 goblins, which sounds insane when you say it out loud. The odds are garbage on paper, but every one of my commanders is at 4th rank or above, and I'm sitting near 7th. The fresh recruits were shaking, white-knuckle gripping their spears like the weapons might bite them, and my ex-slave veterans were grinning. War is a lottery to them, and they already died once, so they bet everything on each fight hoping to win a devil fruit. So we cleared the goblin carts like it was nothing, Shadow and the Ghost Legion moving through them. Like the air itself had turned spiteful. 50 strong ones dead before they even understood the play. The panic did the rest. A goblin with no chain of command is just a dog with no pack. That left the cages, and inside them, 2 eagle women with tear tracks still drying on their faces. Yun and Ya, sisters. The older one had her hand clenched behind her back the whole time. You ever watch somebody decide in real time whether to fight the next thing that opens her cage? Shadow cracked the wood open with one claw, and Yuang was already bouncing up to take credit. The catgirl had taught them the young master routine before I even knew I had new subjects. So when these 2 beautiful warriors dropped to their knees and called me young master, I just nodded. Ayun's voice shook like a leaf in a storm, but her eyes were looking for something to hold on to. I can read people like a book, and that book said she was bartering with herself. She was thinking that if trading her body to a handsome human bought her sister's safety, she'd do it. And you know what? That calculation made me respect her more than any battle cry could. I patted her head and told her to rest, and I watched the fear shift into something stranger. The stench from that goblin cave was curling my nostrils from 100 paces away. I sent Frostfang out to chase down the runners, and she left fast, nose still red from the smell. Pretty sure she'd have rather fought 1,000 goblins than walk back in there. Then Alice came flying in on that spotted tiger, and you could smell the purpose on her. Gnolls, 1,000 of them, marching like they were owed something that was already mine. The second largest tribe in the Wind Whisper Mountains, and they smelled the blood and came running. I just smiled. Some people see a threat, I see a chance to clean the whole house at once. You should have seen them. Dog-headed, black-spotted, and greedy enough to choke on their own spit. Their scouts went out 100 meters and never came back, and Shadow collected them real quiet. An hour of silence and the chief's ears told him something was wrong, but his stomach told him to stay. Greed is a hell of a thing, my friend. It writes checks your body can't cash. So I stood on a boulder, and when the chief finally looked at me, I gave him the whole show. Shave. The 6 styles of the Navy. I pulled that manual out of the ocean last week, just for him. One moment I'm still, the next I'm 10 meters closer, and the guy's brain only had time for one word. Fast. And then his sword broke against mine, and his neck found out the rest. A single slash, a line of blood, and the Gnoll tribe's will to live went with it. Their leader died on the ground with his eyes still open, and the army turned to water behind him. The ones that ran picked the wrong exit, because Andre was waiting at the end of the mountain trail. That man pinned a Gnoll to a tree with his spear and just started turning the handle, nice and slow. He asked about the tribe's location, got a no, and kept twisting like he was corkscrewing a bottle. The Gnoll screamed that he'd never betray his own people, and Andre spun the spear a 3rd time. That's the moment I understood something about my right hand I couldn't unsee. Andre doesn't hate the enemy, he just doesn't care enough about them to rush the work. 3 minutes of that, and the Gnoll gave him everything. Andre left the headless body for the crows. I stood at the campfire that night, grilling meat with salt we'd pried from dead goblin hands. Now you gotta understand, I come from a world where seasoning is a science and an art. So I'm flipping skewers and Frostfang's crying actual tears over how good it smells. Alice took one bite, then held the rest out to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I took a bite, and I told her it was missing cumin, and she asked me what that was. You ever try explaining a spice rack to a woman who thinks magic is for stabbing people only? She said I had to invite her first when I invented it, and the other catgirls all chimed in too. Meanwhile, Aya and Ayun were grilling meat that looked like it had already been eaten once. I handed them 2 of mine, and Aya looked at me like I'd hung the moon for her. Ayun took hers and said nothing, but I felt the gratitude hit me like a wave. Next morning, we marched on the Gnoll tribe and we found the kobolds already doing our job for us. Canine beastmen versus lizard beastmen, a real mess of claws and hate swirling around the plains. I ordered the charge, and Andre's Dragonblood battalion hit them like a red tide. 40 horsemen shouting with the force of 1,000, and the ground itself seemed to flinch. The kobold leader turned around to see a blood-red cloud coming at him, and that was the last thing he saw. Andre's spear turned him into a mist, and then the real work started in earnest. 3 hours later, the Gnoll Valley smelled like copper and wood chips, and I'm not complaining. War is the theme of this continent. I didn't start the song, I'm just dancing to it. We rested 2 hours, then marched on the kobolds home, and they broke in half an hour flat. No main force left, no fight left in them. They scattered into the hills like frightened rabbits. That left 4 tribes standing around the mountains, and I sat down with the map to plan my next move. Ayan stood beside me like a scout in the court, and she laid out the whole board. Wani tribe, strong and few. Minotaurs, big and unknown. Rabbit tribe, weak and leaderless. And the ghost tribe, the real fight, led by a 6th-tier chief who's supposedly the whole package. I told her to send word to her eagle chief. Submit or pack up, it's not a negotiation. Her eyes got wide for a second, then she nodded, because she'd already seen what we do to tribes. I sent Frostfang to the rabbits, Alice and Carl to the minotaurs, and I took the Wani myself. You face the strongest personally. That's the only way the strongest respect you. Dusk found us at the Wani Canyon, and let me tell you about that place for a second. Wooden cabins up the canyon walls, and in the center, an arena carved into the flat ground. 2 bull-horned men were beating each other with an axe and a sword, sparks flying like fireflies. The crowd was howling for blood, and in the stands sat a woman eating thigh meat like it was popcorn. Tsukiheim, Moon Princess, the chief who looked bored while her whole tribe was losing its mind. A warrior named Quinn beat his challenger and then pointed his axe right at her throne. He challenged for chieftain, and the crowd roared, because in this tribe that's a sacred tradition. She took another bite of meat and said, "Here we go again," with exactly the energy of a tired mom. Quinn tried the ancient trick, daring her to break tradition and deny him his right. A spiked club came down from the sky and slammed into the arena like a meteor with bad intentions. Debris hit Quinn and left scratches, and she jumped down, slinging the club over her shoulder. She told him 1 challenge a day is enough, and that he has to call her chief no matter what. The crowd went quiet fast, but Quinn just looked like he was enjoying every second of her anger. She made him a bet. 3 blows and the chieftain's seat was his, fail and no more challenges. He shook his head, and I could feel the twist coming a mile away, because I know that look. He said if he survived 3 blows she had to marry him, and that's when I nearly choked. You can't write this stuff. That man gambled his whole body on a woman's patience and lost. She laughed, the kinda laugh that's not a laugh, and told him the deal was on. He assumed his stance, full of swagger, and she appeared in front of him before his brain caught up. The spiked club swung a full moon arc, and the sound that followed put a period on the whole night. His axe shattered and his body sailed into the mountain wall like a cannonball with a face on it. I stood at the canyon mouth watching, and I decided right then I'd wait until morning to introduce myself. So I stood at that canyon mouth all night, watching the ghost clan carry on without a clue I was there. Come morning I found out their chieftain runs a challenge ring, and she kills Quinn in 1 hit now. The crowd counted the deaths like baseball stats, which told me exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. Tsukiheim stood an inch under 6 feet, spiked club over her shoulder, looking like she owned the whole valley. She announced she'd marry any man who could catch 3 of her batons, and the crowd went dead quiet. A little girl raised her hand to ask if a woman could enter too, and got a death stare for her trouble. That girl said she couldn't beat the chief anyway. She was just curious, like that made it better. With no challengers left, Tsukiheim was about to call it quits, so I figured that was my opening. I dropped onto that arena without a sound and asked if the bet applied to people outside the tribe. You should have seen the ghost clan scramble, every horned warrior ready to jump me on the spot. They couldn't sense a drop of my energy, which made them think I was hiding something huge, and they were right. She asked who I was, and I told her, Lox Zeke, Lord of Dawn territory, wearing my calmest smile. Before answering her question about why I came, I reminded her she never answered mine about that marriage bet. She looked me over, bull horns and all, and asked if I really wanted to marry her, and I said yes. Marry a beautiful wife and absorb a whole tribe in 1 move. That's what my grandpa would call efficiency. She said outsiders don't just take 3 hits, they gotta defeat her first, so I shook my head. She got offended and told me to leave, and that's when I flipped her whole challenge on its head. I told her if she could take 3 of my strikes I'd pledge to her clan, but if she couldn't she'd submit to me. The entire demon tribe erupted screaming that I was arrogant, that she'd kill me, that she'd one-shot me. They could scream all they wanted, but my gut said she was strong and confident enough to take the deal. She agreed, and we moved to opposite ends of the arena with the whole crowd chanting for my head on a spike. I told her she'd find out if I matched my words, and then I drew a blade wrapped in jet black hockey. That sword came out looking like something dragged up from hell, and I launched at her like a black meteor. She swung that spiked club with everything she had, and when the blades met the shockwave threw demons everywhere. Then I heard a crack, and her club, that massive thing, started splitting right down the middle. Armament hockey doesn't care how sturdy your weapon is, it just breaks, and her face went pure disbelief. The club shattered into pieces, she staggered back, and tried to regroup with a punch I never let her throw. I put my sword to her neck before her fist could land, and that was only my second cut. She was smart enough to know 1 more swing would leave her dead or crippled, so she dropped the fight. The whole valley went silent, not a single demon chanting now, just the cold wind whistling through the rocks. She laughed and asked what she should call me now, clan leader, husband, or master, and I told her my name. That little kindness bought me more goodwill than any threat could have, and I knew it the second it landed. Her people started shouting that I cheated, that her weapon was faulty, that they needed a rematch bare-handed. She shut them up fast, asking when demon warriors became sore losers, and suddenly nobody had anything to say. She said the bet was her problem, her people could stay or leave, but she wouldn't let it implicate the tribe. I smiled and asked otherwise what, and she said she'd break the contract, even if it meant they'd all die. I pointed out I could take the tribe by force anyway, and she said if they couldn't stop me, so be it. That's when her people surprised me, every one of them shouting they'd follow her and submit to me willingly. The Ghost Clan's unity impressed me. A bunch of goblins would have tried to stab me in the back by now. I let loose my conqueror's haki, that heavy dominant pressure, and watched Tsukihime's eyes go wide and scared. I promised them they'd have the same status as humans, that I want subjects, not slaves, and by God I meant it. I told her Dawn wiped out 3 tribes in 2 days, not to intimidate her, but to sell the better life. And then I spent an hour explaining what we had built, so they knew exactly what they were signing up for. By the time the crowd dispersed to pack, her whole tribe was on board, and I kept their canyon as a future campsite. Since I had meetings with 3 other tribe leaders the next day, I took her along to the kobold camp. She asked about the black gas on my blade, so I explained armament haki, and showed it coating my finger like liquid metal. Then she bit my finger, actually bit it, and I just stood there while she tested if it was really harder than steel. She said that's why her club broke so easily, and I told her there was more to try later, just not with teeth. She asked if she could learn haki and I told her no, only my bloodline descendants can master it. Her face dropped for 1 second, then lit up like a lantern. Well, that means our child can learn it. And before I could blink she was stripping me right there saying let's have the baby now, and I had to stop. I told her to wait until we got home, and she called me pretentious, saying the scenery was nice enough. She explained demon women take the initiative with strong men, because strong blood is rarer than anything. 2 hours of that conversation later, we reached the kobold camp, and I found Alice and the others already there. The tent had Frostfang, Shadow, Andre, Carl, plus the 3 new chiefs waiting to bend the knee. An old eagle man with gray wings, a wounded minotaur wrapped in bandages, and a gentle rabbit woman with blue hair. I barely sat down before Tsukihime tapped the minotaur chief's shoulder and told him to move so she could sit. So Tsukihime did what any reasonable demon warrior would do, she tore the clothes off like she was opening a package. The next morning I stepped out of that tent feeling fine while she stayed behind, paying for her pride. Yoing and Frostfang looked at me fresh as ever and then at the empty seat, and they just nodded in respect. Even a 6-tier warrior lost that fight last night, and suddenly they felt better about their own defeats. Breakfast was quiet, and I sent the chiefs back to move their people while we held the kobold mine. So 3 months passed in a blur of decisions, and I barely noticed the season turning on us. The 4 tribes more than doubled my population, which meant every morning started with somebody's problem. Over 2,600 new faces, all needing houses, food, and a reason not to riot. I spent most days fishing treasure from the endless sea, hoping the ocean still owed me favors. 4 hours of casting and hauling got me 2 chests, which felt like a slow day at the office. But the first chest held a banana-shaped fruit, and bananas are never the boring kind, trust me. It was the den mushi fruit, which is a snail that works like a phone, which sounds insane. In the One Piece world, these snails carry calls, photos, and even broadcasts, and I grew up on that. Communication here is a messenger on a horse, so this fruit was worth more than a dozen castles. You know how much it costs to send a letter across a kingdom? Yeah, I did that math too. I couldn't hand that power to just anybody, so I started running through the women I trusted. Tsukihime is a warrior, not a spy, and Bailing is a fox, so a snail fruit felt weird there. That left Jenny, Hack's daughter, who could help her father build an intelligence network from scratch. The second chest was the flower fruit, pink like blooming petals, and I knew that one too. Nico Robin's fruit lets you grow body parts anywhere you can see, which is terrifying and useful. A swordsman could grow 1,000 arms, but I like one good blade, so I passed on that. Bailing is my secretary and she handles documents, eavesdropping, and rescue, so it fits her perfectly. I called her into my study, and she blushed like I wanted something else, which I didn't deny. I sat her on my lap and explained the fruit while she tried to keep a straight face. She ate the whole thing with a pained expression, and I swear I heard her tail thump the floor. Downstairs, Alice had returned from the coast with Shadow and Frostfang, plus a stranger in white robes. Her name was Vivian, daughter of the Starsea Merchant Guild's president, and she was here to trade. Alice saved her caravan from kobolds on the beach, which is a hell of a way to make friends. Vivian brought salt, which my territory desperately needed, so I welcomed her with a smile. She was charming, but my real question was whether seawater hurts devil fruit users in this world. Alice tested it by diving under completely, and she came up grinning with no weakness at all. If the sea has no power over fruits here, then eating one is a pure upgrade with no catch. I had Shadow dip a hand in Frostfang too, and Bailing, and nobody felt anything wrong. Then I cut a barrel's top off with a slash so clean not a drop spilled, just to show off. Vivian went pale watching that, and I could almost hear her recalculating how dangerous I was. Bailing showed off her new power by growing arms out of Shadow's back, and the poor girl yelped. Frostfang wrapped her tail around one of those arms, which just made the whole scene more ridiculous. Vivian looked like she had just watched someone break the laws of nature with a parlor trick. An hour later, I sent Bailing to settle the merchants while Alice went back to the ranch. Then I took Shadow and Frostfang to the Research Institute, where Hack and Jenny run experiments. Hack was out delivering fertilizer, which made me smile, because this man will study anything. I found Jenny inside and told her I had a fruit only I trusted her to carry. Her face lit up like I had given her a kingdom, and I guess I kinda did. Hack came back and his eyes went wide when he heard it was the Den mushy fruit. I explained the snails work by biowaves, converting magnetic fields into sound and images. The Beast girls looked lost, but Hack got it immediately, because I had talked to him about phones. Jenny agreed to eat it and become head of my intelligence department, and I believed her. She peeled the banana fruit, took a deep breath, and then suddenly covered her mouth. Before she even took a bite, which made no sense because the awful taste comes from chewing. Frostfang and Shadow were disappointed they missed her suffering face, the little monsters. Hack said it might not be psychological, and then he dropped the words I never saw coming. He said she could be pregnant, and my whole world rearranged itself in one quiet sentence. I picked her up and spun her around, and she laughed while telling me it wasn't confirmed yet. I knew it was true, the way you know a storm is coming before you see the clouds. The two Beast girls looked down at their own stomachs, and I saw the gears turning in their heads. Jenny ate just one bite and got the power, which made Frostfang scream about my twisted sense of humor. She had eaten an entire bunch of bananas for her fruit, and I let her suffer, which is fair. I told them to keep the one bite secret, and they grinned like they were planning blackmail. Then I sent Shadow to catch snails, and she came back with a whole army of them. Jenny stared at the biggest one, and after a moment the snail opened its mouth and said hello. Well, it tried, and instead of hello we got something that sounded like a drunk cat. The voice was exactly Jenny's, which made Frostfang and Shadow lose their minds completely. Hack's eyes lit up, because this was real and the implications were bigger than any joke. I took the snail and walked away, and it called me a roasted pig, which I deserved. The girls doubled over laughing, and I gave each of them a chop to the neck to restore order. Hack realized we could combine the Shadow fruit with Den mushi to make cameras and projectors. I kissed Jenny and told her to rest, and left with the Beast girls while the moon climbed. News of the pregnancy spread by dinner, and every woman at the table looked at me differently. Alice noted same-race babies are easier, and Tsukihime declared demons win by sheer quantity. That was a challenge, and I'm not the kind of man who lets a challenge stand. Tsukihime took me for a walk after dinner, and 3 hours later she was somehow still hungry. Then Shadow and Frostfang arrived with their own appetites, and I lost track of the night. Next morning, I trained hockey for 3 hours and swordsmanship for 1, because routine keeps me sane. I went to the market, and the merchants had brought real seafood, which I hadn't eaten in 18 years. Vivian found me staring at dried fish, and introduced me to her bodyguard Diana, a third-rank warrior. I asked why they only dried fish, and she explained fresh seafood rots before it travels. I mentioned freezing, and she said ice mages refused to work for merchants, which tracks. So I filed that problem under Hack's list, alongside refrigerators and air conditioning for the South. Vivian gave me a tour of their goods, and the conversation was honestly pleasant, no agenda. 2 hours later, I left because the territory still needs building and I have no time to spare. 4 months passed in a blink, and Jenny's belly grew while every other woman watched with envy. One by one, Shadow, Frostfang, Bailing, Alice, and the others all got pregnant after that. Only Tsukihime stayed quiet, and I swear she started training even harder out of spite. You know, the ghost tribe has the most numbers and the worst luck, which honestly checks out. My territory doubled, my women are thriving, and I have a future I never planned for. I'm building a family and intelligence network at the same time, which is a strange kind of busy. Every morning I wake up exhausted but smiling, and I don't regret a single one of those choices. The sea gives fruit, the women give hairs, and the lords across the river can keep watching. Let them wonder how a small territory suddenly has so much to protect, let them guess. I just hope the snacks hold out, because a household this big eats like an army on leave. So there I was, 3 hours of fishing in the endless sea for one rotten chest, and it paid off. I pulled out the ice fruit, the exact Logia fruit Admiral Kuzan used back in the old stories. Logia means I turn my whole body into the element, and ice don't exactly conflict with my swordsmanship. You know how long I chewed on that decision. About as long as it takes to say free power. The taste though, that stuff is worse than anything you ever scraped off a New York sidewalk. I swallowed it and felt the cold rush through me, and suddenly the whole world felt like my freezer. I drew my sword and jammed it straight through my own stomach just to show off. No blood, just frost. The door opens and Tsukihime walks in on me stabbing myself, and you should have seen her face. She thought I was losing it, but I convinced her to come outside and test the new powers on her. She hits me with that spiked club, and I just let it pass through a cloud of cold mist. Nothing. Her eyes went wide, and then I put my cold hands on her head and froze her solid in one go. 5 seconds later she bursts out of the ice, and I can tell she ain't happy about it. 2 times I froze her that afternoon, and the second time she broke free even faster, still furious. You ever see a pretty woman swing a spiked club like she's trying to kill the sidewalk? That was her. 2 hours of sparring and I wasn't even winded, but she collapsed on the ground like a sack of bricks. I picked her up, carried her inside, and she tells me that since she's tired, I get to be on top. That girl's got more stamina in her mouth than she does in her legs, I'll tell you that much. Next morning I left her sleeping and went straight to Jenny and her growing belly at the research institute. She handed me a train den mushi, which is basically a snail that works like a phone. I gave Hack 3 new devil fruits to study and told him I was heading to the misty forest to train. He said don't worry, his daughter's pregnant and he's got a grandson to look after anyway. A reclusive old scientist suddenly excited about being a grandpa was the most wholesome thing I'd seen in months. I left Alice in charge of running things and Tsukihime in charge of breaking things, and I headed out. But standing at the edge of that forest, my heart started pounding for no reason at all. Something in there nearly killed me with a single glance once, probably a ninth order being. You ever get that feeling that you're walking into a place you might not walk back out of? Yeah. Meanwhile, back in Quartz City, Roland was in labor, sweating through the whole damn ordeal. She pushed through it and gave birth to my first son, a black-haired kid with skin like silk. 10 months since I'd seen her and I didn't even know that distance between us is a real problem. She said the kid looks just like me, and then she kissed his cheek and thought about where I was. Me, training. I should have been there, but the round trip takes half a month and this territory can't spare me that long. That's the price of building something. You don't get to be everywhere for the people who need you. So instead I went and picked a fight with a 7th tier Gale Griffin that could shred a building. That thing hit me with wind blades that shattered my ice wall, and then I got blown clean across the forest. I left a trail of ice where my body slid, and honestly that fight was the most fun I'd had in weeks. Most things I fight now die in one hit, but this griffin actually made me work for the win. I opened my mouth and let out cold air like a freezer door, then hit it with my sky-splitting slash. That blade turned everything around us into ice sculptures, trees and all the little beasts nearby. And at the center of that forest, something huge sneezed and knocked over a tree with the force of it. The thing grumbled about winter coming and went right back to sleep, and I decided to leave it alone. You don't poke a sleeping dragon, and you definitely don't poke a sleeping whatever the hell that was. I trained for months sharpening that fruit, thinking I'd come back same as always, the big protector. But by June all hell had broken loose back home, and I wasn't even there to see it start. A convoy of lizardmen was rolling through the fields, green skins and scales and teeth like steak knives. They had wooden cages full of human children, 82 kids with dried tears on their faces. These lizard bastards come every year to take children as sacrifices to their tribal gods, honestly. The leader was bragging about how the gods hate older kids, like they're ordering takeout instead of people. And they were heading straight for my territory, the one place in this world I told myself I couldn't leave. Alice spotted them early with her trained spirit vision eagle, the bird that can sense enemy strength. That bird gave the signal for 5th tier enemies, and the alarm went out across the whole territory. Farmers dropped their tools and went home without panic, because they actually trust us to handle it. Vivian and her business partner Diana were in the market when the sirens hit, completely lost. A random resident told them to hide, saying the army would handle it, and didn't even seem scared. Vivian noticed that trust right away, the kind of faith you almost never see in an ordinary territory. She went to find a fight anyway, because of course the merchant lady who owns everything wants to help. Alice met them riding a colorful winged tiger, 3 months pregnant with a belly already showing. She said she wouldn't need to fight, her tiger Meow Meow could hold off the enemy by himself. I should be here, I thought when I wasn't there, but my people were already making their stand. 50 warriors on dragonblood horses were lined up on the plains, waiting for the lizardmen to arrive. Andre gave the head count, and it wasn't pretty. 300 lizardmen, 3 5th tier captains. Then 15 4th tier, over 50 2nd tier, 120 1st tier plus the grunts. That force could wipe out most tribes in the region, and my best warriors were all 7 months pregnant. Frostfang and Shadow couldn't move around easy, so it fell to Alice, Tsukihime, Andre and the rest. My wives took command and sent out the Eagle Clan and Rabbit Clan leaders to stand in my place. The lizardmen finally arrived, saw all the farmland, and assumed it was still the same weak territory. One of the captains grabbed a farmer and demanded offerings, then kicked him face first into the mud. The lizardman laughed like that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen, bullying somebody half his size. He called humans earthworms born to till the land for the lizard tribe, a real charming guy. But the farmer he kicked wasn't scared. He was playing the part, and his face was pure murder underneath. 20 minutes later the ground started shaking, and the lizardmen saw an army coming for them. Humans, demons, minotaurs, eagle people, cat people, rabbit people all together against them. The lizard captain figured allies explained it, like that would be enough to stop his tribe. Then Tsukihime rode in on the winged tiger, and I wish I could have seen her leap off that thing. She slammed her spiked club into the ground and cracked the earth, letting them feel her energy. 6th-tier warrior. The lizardman went pale and 3 5th-tier captains rushed her at once. She smashed one guy's claws apart and kicked him flying, then caught another one mid-bite with her club. She shoved the spike right into his mouth and asked how it tasted, then spun it like a meat grinder. Teeth went flying, blood everywhere, and the guy tried to scream but couldn't get anything out. A third lizard hit her with his tail and knocked her flying, but she caught herself on the club. The one with the ruined mouth charged her in a rage, and she just laughed and asked him if he really wanted more. The other captain tried to help, but the winged tiger knocked him straight into a playground. Tiger and lizard went at it, one 5th-tier beast against a 5th-tier warrior, evenly matched. And Glock, the one who'd been kicked flying, looked at the main force and spotted several more 5th-tier fighters. He shouted a full retreat and said they needed to report back, which is the smartest thing he did all day. But as soon as he turned, those cowering farmers in the field dropped the act and charged the cage carts. They were trained soldiers playing weak this whole time, and the lizardmen guarding the children never saw it coming. So my people fought the battle without me, and I was miles away training with an ice fruit in a forest. The strips I built, and this dango fruit gives you perfect control. Trust me, it only gets stronger from here. Jenny's voice came through the Den Mushi, which is this Arx's magical snail phone, and she sounded rattled. She started explaining that some lizardmen had come to my territory demanding children as tribute to their god. I stopped gutting the snake and stood there in the middle of a foggy forest, meat juice dripping off my fingers. I'd been gone 2 months, training with an ice fruit, and in that time something crawled into my backyard. Let me back up a second, cause you need to know what I came home to. My people, the ones I left behind, they fought an escort team of lizardmen without me, and they won the fight. But they only won because they caught the lizards off guard, and now the whole tribe knows where we live. The tribe numbers in the hundreds of thousands, and their strongest are way past anything my soldiers have ever seen. That's the situation the second I land back at Dawn Ridge with a giant griffin and a full belly. The griffin, by the way, is a 7th-tier magical beast, which is my world's way of saying it could swat a house like a fly. I tamed it, if you can call it that, by feeding it roasted meat until it forgot it ever wanted to kill me. I know what, I'm not above admitting that eats me up a little. My whole crew fought a war while I was making snacks. I flew home on Gale, which is what I named the griffin, and landed right outside the council chamber. So the official meeting is already underway when I walk in, and the atmosphere is heavy enough to smell it. Vivian's this 3rd-tier mage from a merchant guild, and she's trying to convince Alice that we should all pack up and run. She's got the numbers too. The lizardman tribe keeps 50 or more 6th-tier fighters on retainer, and that's just counting the ones they brag about. Alice is my operations chief, the one who actually runs things while I'm off wrestling eagles, and she's not buying into the panic. Vivian's about to argue her point when she hears me speak from behind her, and I tell her nobody said I couldn't stop them. She spins around, spots the griffin, and trips over her own feet like she just saw the world's worst landlord walk in. An ice chair catches her before she hits the ground. That's the fruit working, and it makes a hell of an entrance. I pull her up by the hand and tell her the merchant guild can leave if they want, no hard feelings, but they can't come crawling back later. She decides to stay and watch, and honestly I gotta appreciate the curiosity. Most folks would have been halfway to the coast. Inside the chamber the mood is still heavy, because my people don't have Alice's blind faith in me. Tsukihime asks how much stronger I got, and she's one of my most trusted fighters, top tier, a real spear in the ground. I tell her just a little, which was a lie, and she looks at me like I just told her the sky was green. So the meeting starts, and Alice runs through the battle report with all the calm of a woman who's done this 1,000 times. We killed 2 5th-tier lizardmen, 13 4th-tier, 28 3rd-tier, and rescued 45 children from that cage cart. We lost 1 3rd-tier soldier, 5 2nd-tier, and 11 1st-tier, That's 17 families in my territory who just got a knock on the door. I know that trade sounds good on paper, but I can't think about my people in merit numbers. That's a slippery slope into a real bad place. And the thing is, no matter how many lizardmen died, they took the fight to my doorstep and demanded children. That part I wasn't gonna let slide, no matter how good the trade was. Some lines just don't move. Next wave's coming, and this time they know what we got. No more surprises, just a straight fight against a tribe that outnumbers us. I figured it was time to stop trusting my own two fists and start trusting the people who'd bleed for me. So after the meeting I pulled aside 7 of my best fighters, and I laid a spread out on the table that made their eyes go wide. 7 devil fruits, all weird looking, covered in spiral patterns, each one worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Now, a devil fruit is a one-bite deal. You eat it, you get a power, and you can never swim again, that's the catch. I don't let them pick their own. I hand each man his fruit, cause if I didn't, they'd fight each other over the good ones. There's no useless devil fruit, only useless users, and I say that to their faces before I make the first call. New-da, my red-skinned minotaur, he gets the power fruit. Pure strength, no frills, just him hitting things harder. He swallows it whole and his face goes through about 9 expressions, every one of them worse than the last. That man looks like he just bit into a lemon that was secretly a hornet's nest, and I tell him to sit down. Dark Nether gets the saber-toothed tiger fruit, which is basically a stronger body and sharper claws, no surprises there. Night Owl gets speed, cause that man was already quick as a rumor, and now he's quick as a lie. Kyle gets the stone fruit, so he can turn his body to rock and merge with the ground, which is a real obnoxious defensive trick. Kushin gets a short-faced bear fruit, which is a zone, meaning he turns into a giant freaking bear. That one's gonna be trouble when he figures out how high he can jump, and I'm already dreading the structural damage. Vash, a 3rd-tier human who fought like a demon in the last battle, gets cement powers. Yeah, cement, stay with me. He's my new mason. I'm about to build a wall around the whole territory, and that forced me to think of a plan that doesn't involve me punching everything. Then I get to the last fruit on the table, and Mina's looking at me with these big hopeful eyes like a dog watching you open a treat bag. I hand her the cream fruit. She can turn her body into cream and make, well, cream. Her face just goes blank. She asks me what kind of weird ability that is, and I tell her it's a good one, trust me. That fruit's a sleeper. You think it's a gag till you realize how much you can do with a substance that goes anywhere and fills any space. She eats it anyway, real elegant, no dramatic faces. After watching New-da and the boys, it's like a palate cleanser. Everyone clears out to go practice their new powers, and the room gets real quiet, real fast, which should have been my first warning. Tsukihime wraps her arms around my neck, sits on my lap, and asks where her fruit is, like I owe her rent. I tell her I didn't have one that fit her yet, and she asks for the power fruit, cause she likes the simple stuff. I explain that the pure power fruit doesn't have enough variation, and that she deserves something that matches what she can already do. Alice, bless her, she talks about her own dango dumpling fruit, how much perfect control it gives her, and that settles Tsukihime down. Then Tsukihime starts making this joke about calling Mina and Cream, and I shut her up quick before the whole council hears it. Alice just silently walks out, and I'm pretty sure she's gonna charge somebody a cleaning fee tomorrow. Next morning I'm moving around fine, feeling refreshed, and I go find Hack, Kyle and Vash. Hence, my fastest infrastructure team on Earth gets formed, and Hack's the foreman, Kyle's the bricklayer, and Vash is the mixer. That wall goes up around the entire territory so fast you'd think they were building it out of spite, and honestly maybe they were. I'm standing on top of it by the end of the week, watching them work, and I gotta say, this feels different than fighting. Fighting's about what I can take. Building's about what I can leave behind, and that's a bigger kinda strength. Back across the river, Glock, the lizardman who ran from my people like a coward, he finally drags his tail home. He's only got a dozen survivors left out of the whole escort team, and the patrol who finds him asks where the sacrifices are. You ever see a man realize he's about to take the fall for something that wasn't his fault? His face did that. He knows the chief's gonna come down on him, so he grabs the patrol guard by the arm and demands a direct audience. He tells them that the humans have allied with the Oni, the Minotaur, the Rabbit, the Eagle, and the Cat tribes against them. Offerings stolen, his whole crew dead, and only a handful escaped, which is a war crime dressed up as an excuse. Now the chief's gonna hear that a bunch of human farmers stole his tribute, and he's gonna answer with everything he's got. I've got a wall, a griffin, an ice fruit, and a bunch of people who just learned what they can really do. And this time I'm not gonna be in some forest making barbecue while my people bleed. You follow me? The storm's coming, but I've stopped trying to catch it with my bare hands. Gonna build a roof instead. If that lizard chief wants a war, he's gonna get one where the walls are made of stone, and the men are made of faith. I tamed a monster and gave my people the tools to tame their own. That's the whole game now. So the lizardman had exactly the reaction you'd expect from a tribe that runs the whole swamp on fear. Chief Kavalu, 4 meters of purple grudge, sits on his stone throne and hears the whole sorry story from Glock. And the room goes quiet, the way your landlord goes quiet before he tells you the rent is going up. Glock lost the god's offering and damn near everybody he dragged out with him, so he's begging on his knees. Kavalu doesn't even look at him. He turns to Gulag, the old green high priest who looks like a turtle that retired. Gulag says sure, give the idiot another shot, but here's the kicker, the alliance only has one 6th-tier fighter. So 5 tier 6 warriors should be plenty, and you want the numbers to look scary even if the math is overkill. Kavalu signs off on it, and word spreads through the tribe, and every lizardman in the swamp is furious. A bunch of humans dared to defy them, so the whole nest is hot to go out and collect some blood. Meanwhile, back on my side of the river, the wall's just finished, and I gotta say, Hack outdid himself. He built catapults and crossbows, not exactly high-tech, but he's got my head and his brain working together. The crossbow bolts punch clean through tier 3 lizard scales, and the catapults can crack a tier 4 if they land lucky. And let's be honest, the kobolds paid for most of this, because their iron mines and old weapons funded the whole party. 5 days later, the tribe crosses the long river, marching over 5,000 strong, and my scout eagle spots them. The alarm goes off, the residents head home, and dead quiet falls over the market like somebody cancelled the whole town. Vivian stays behind and she's watching the wall, and you can see her doing the math in her head. 3 people built something that should have taken a year or 2, and she's thinking, maybe these lunatics can actually do this. She tells Diana to come watch how I stop an army, and honestly, that vote of confidence felt better than the wall. You see, I sat up there like a marine admiral, one guy in a chair waiting for 5,000 angry reptiles. Because if I handle everything myself, this whole territory never learns to fight, and war is the best classroom there is. So I let them swing first, and I keep my observation hockey up, and I count the strong ones coming at me. 5 tier 6 warriors, comparable to elite vice admirals, which is basically half a buster call pointed at my front door. That could level a small country, which says a lot about the lizardmen, and a lot less about my current problems. See, my panel says I'm sitting between 7th and 8th tier, so 5 of those guys is more of a warm-up than a war. Glock leads the army right up to the new walls, and the look on his face when he sees them is worth the whole trip. Last time he was here, it was farmland, and now it's a fortress, and his commander Reeve kicks him across the dirt. Reeve says no way this went up in 5 days, and Glock's just stammering, cause he knows how insane it sounds. The commander decides it's just a wall, so they keep coming, and I wait until they're in catapult range before I give the word. 20 catapults lob boulders the size of small cars, and the lizardmen look up and realize they're in a meteor shower. The first volley turns whole squads into paste, and when the boulders hit the ground they shatter and shred the second wave. Reeve starts yelling to spread out, and the tier 5s start swatting rocks, and suddenly the catapults are just an inconvenience. Reeve himself jumps up and claws one apart mid-air, and the army pushes to within 500 meters of my front door. So I switch to the crossbows, 10 giant iron bolts that lock on, and the first one skewers a tier 3 and his buddy behind him. They're brutal, but there's only 10 of them, so the archers gotta pick up the slack with a hail of regular arrows. By the time they hit the 100-meter mark, they've lost damn near 1,000 soldiers, and still they keep coming. Reeve's screaming to avenge the dead, and right on cue, another boulder comes at him, but this one's got a passenger. Tsukihime, that crazy demon girl with the spiked club, rides the rock in and kicks it so it goes red hot from the friction. Reeve claws it apart, thinks she's the leader, and asks her straight, and she answers with a club to his whole worldview. The hit sends him flying, and then my tier 5s jump off the wall, Nude and the others, and it becomes a real brawl. The weaker people stay on the wall to handle climbers, because my whole goal here is training, not proving I can do it alone. The lizardmen climb like geckos, sticking to the stone, and that's when Kyle, our stone fruit user, starts the real show. A massive stone golem rises out of the wall and starts swallowing climbers, sucking them into the rock like it's quicksand. A tier 6 with a battle axe chops its arm clean off, calls it fragile, and then gets grabbed and slam-dunked into the dirt. He breaks free and hacks it up repeatedly, but here's the thing, he can't find the real body, so he's fighting a puppet forever. 2 hours of that, 2 hours of Tsukihime holding 3 tier 6s on her own, bleeding from 100 cuts and still smiling. My reserves are running dry, and the troops are taking real losses, so I finally stand up and decide class is over. I lock onto every strong fighter on the field, and then I vanish, leaving just a pale blue mist where I used to be. The axe goes through the golem's chest, and Kyle has to bail out of the stone, and the lizardman screams that he found him. Kyle throws up his stone wings to block, knowing he's about to die, and the lizardman's laughing, thinking he's already won. Then I pour a lungful of freezing air straight down that open mouth, and his laugh becomes a statue's last expression. He's ice before he hits the ground, and the troops behind him panic, because they didn't even see what killed their champion. I put a hand on the frozen body and shatter it into 1,000 crystals, and that's when they all realize who they're dealing with. Training's over, so I raise an arm and let the cold out like a tidal wave, and hundreds of them freeze solid where they stand. Kyle pulls his wings away and sees a field of ice statues wearing faces of pure despair, and he whispers about what I really am. He's lived decades and he's never seen anything like me, and now he's wondering what his lord actually costs to oppose. Over on the main fight, Tsukihime's on her knees with 2 tier 6s holding her down while Reeve lines up a shot at her heart. His claws come in for the kill. And that's when Marge shows up, cold as my mood, and catches the blow right at her chest. I ask him what he thinks he's doing, and you can see every instinct he's got screaming at him to run from me. He tries to back off, but I've got the 6 styles on my side, and I'm in front of him before his feet finish the idea. My blade comes down and he turns his body just enough, and the sword takes his whole left arm instead of his head. He screams for help, and 2 other tier 6s whip their tails at me from both sides, and I just duck under the tag team. Their tails smack each other hard enough to make a wet slam, and then I spin up a frost storm that drags them both into the cold. Reeve shouts that I'm a 7th tier ice mage, trying to get the word out, and I put my sword through his chest to speed it up. I tell him he talks too much, twist the blade, and give him the full frozen treatment, then shatter him like the others. The 2 tail flingers break out of the ice, see Reeve's pieces on the ground, and decide they've got urgent business elsewhere. They run in 2 different directions, and the whole Lizardmen army sees their elites running, so the morale just evaporates. My gates open and the warriors who spent 2 hours hiding behind walls suddenly pour out to chase the army they were terrified of. I hunt the officers myself, and I carve through 2 more tier 6s and 8 tier 5s before the river stops the whole route. The Lizardmen dive in like drowning dogs, and my people line the bank laughing, calling out about stinking riverbeds and their place in them. I don't freeze the river, and that's a choice, because I want those survivors carrying a message home for me. A few of them limping back tells the chiefs that I'm a 7th tier ice mage, and that's exactly the fear I'm selling. I figure the real fight comes next, because this was just a scouting party, and a tribe like theirs shows up big when it's hurt. I hop on my winged tiger, tell it to fly higher, and the poor thing's been so scared of becoming soup it actually behaves now. It's a 5th tier beast and it's eaten 6th tier meat with me, so it knows exactly where it stands in my kitchen hierarchy. The whole army's eyes follow us up, and you can feel the shift, because now they're looking at me like I'm their religion. I tell them this battle, a great victory, and the roar comes back so loud it probably spooked the lizardmen still swimming away. But I pull them back down fast, because I've got to be honest about what's coming for us in the next round. But I leave them burning, because if I feed the fire now, I feed their fear, and that's a different kind of fuel. I tell them if they trust me, not a single lizardman crosses those walls, and the crowd boils over into screaming my name. They call me Long Live, waving spears and fists, and you know they'd march into the swamp on my word alone, no question. Meanwhile, back at the stone fortress, the last tier 6 crawls home, one arm gone, frost still biting into his flesh. He grabs the patrol lizardman and demands to see the chief, and the poor guy recognizes the whole disaster from last time. Kavulu is in the middle of breeding with a whole harem of lovely lizards, and the knock on his door doesn't improve his mood. He slaps the door open naked, and the steward tells him Reeve's dead and the war is lost, and you should see that stone bed shatter. The truth lands, a 7th tier ice mage across the river, and Kavulu calms right down, because that math finally makes sense. He calls Gulag and every tier 6 to a meeting, and everyone's furious, but nobody's volunteering to lead the next charge. Gulag says if we want this done right, the chief and I go ourselves, and suddenly 6 tier warriors remember they're brave again. And that's the last word. The tribe starts sharpening its biggest knives, because next time the swamp itself comes for me. So the wives kept trying to convince me I deserved a happy ending, and Tsukihime kept being pregnant adjacent, which is apparently not the same thing. Seemed the only way to keep the peace was to win the war, so I threw myself into prep with all the focus of a man avoiding homework. Then the alarm rang while I was checking Jenny's belly, and I felt a real buzzkill settle over the whole castle. The lizardmen had finished their powwow. Nearly 30,000 of them were marching this time, which is a number that politely outclasses my entire territory. Now, I have 1,000 soldiers and a population of 5,000, so the math isn't subtle, but I've never met a lizardman smart enough to do division. Yoying, who's about as pregnant as a woman can get, volunteered to go invisible and scout the enemy positions. I patted her head and told her the enemy's every move was already watched by my spirit vision eagle, so maybe just focus on the baby shower. She pouted, and I swear those girls could plan a nursery and a tactical invasion in the same breath without breaking stride. I told them all to stay in the castle, that I'd handle it, and the chorus of "I believe in you" was so earnest it nearly made me forget the odds. I grabbed Tsukiheim, hopped on my 7th tier Gale Griffin, and flew to the city gate feeling like a dad heading out for milk. The streets were orderly instead of panicked this time, and Vivian watched me pass with a look I knew wasn't just civic pride. She asked Diana if I could really block this attack, and her bodyguard stayed quiet, which was answer enough for a smart woman. Then Vivian decided she wanted to come watch, and I gotta say the timing was better than the forecast, which was calling for doom. Up on the wall, the air smelled of old blood and new fear, and for once, even the wind sounded like it was second-guessing itself. I drew the Sandai Kitetsu, a demonic sword that gets happiest when it's eating a ghost, and the mist started pouring into it like a straw. With armament haki and extreme cold pouring off the blade, I cut the sky clean open, 100 meters of blue slash that split the clouds. The soldiers behind me lost it, screaming my name like I'd just paid off their mortgages, and honestly, the morale boost felt better than the swing itself. 2 clicks out, the lizardmen saw the crack in heaven, and you could hear the swagger drain out of 30,000 throats. One of them tried to explain it was just a small opening, and his voice got quieter with every word until the whole column shut up. Their chieftain Kavalu asked the high priest what I really was, and old Gulag put me at the peak of the 7th rank. That answer meant I wasn't an 8th tier, so Kavalu figured sheer numbers would bury me eventually, which is adorable coming from a reptile. They approached slower, and I used observation haki to count the scary ones, 2 7th tiers, 26 tiers, over 100 5th tiers. So the Tower of Muscle walked forward to parley, and I dropped down with the griffin to meet him, 1 in the air, 1 on the ground. Chief Kavilu demanded to know who I was, so I gave him the full press release, Lox Zeke, Lord of Dawnlord, and asked why he'd brought the whole swamp. He said I slaughtered 5,000 of his people, and that debt gets paid in blood, and he let his 7th tier pressure roll out like a tide. My griffin screeched right back, and the pressure folded back over his own officers, sending that message straight to the Lizardmen group chat. I told him I couldn't hear him over my partner's bad attitude, and his face went from stone to storm in about half a second flat. He threatened to breach my walls and slaughter my people, and I just savored how much I was about to ruin his entire afternoon. He called my crew trash, said he'd love to see my expression, and I told him 99% of his army wouldn't survive standing near me. Then I did the stupidest, most beautiful thing I've done in months. I released my Conqueror's haki, and the sky cracked open again with black and red lightning. That aura hit 30,000 lizardmen like a freight train made of panic, and below the 4th tier, they started dropping like overripe fruit. I watched their eyeballs roll back while they crumpled, and the stench of fear washed over the field like a whole swamp got set on fire. One moment there was an army, the next there was a parking lot of unconscious reptiles, and about 900 of them still on their feet. Those survivors were shaking, asking what the black lightning was, and I told them it wasn't a spell, just my resting vibe. Kavalu looked like he'd swallowed a porcupine, completely in over his scaly head, and I offered him the easy way out. I told him his whole army couldn't take my aura, so maybe he should pack it in and head back to the swamp before I tried ice. He tried to play it tough with the 1,000 conscious warriors, so I raised a palm, and 2,000 ice needles filled the sky, like a blizzard holding a grudge. I asked him one question, shall we make a move? And the high priest grabbed his arm, before he could do something tragically stupid. Kavalu wanted to sacrifice some of his own tribe for pride, but Gulag knew that betrayal back home would unravel the whole Lizardman political scene. So the chieftain stood there, steam practically rising off his neck, and finally spat out the word retreat like it was poison. They woke up there unconscious and limped home humiliated, and I hovered over them with my ice needles, making sure they understood the message. That outcome wasn't me being merciful, it was me being smart, because losing a 7th tier in a mutual annihilation helps nobody back home. My people were screaming my name, convinced I was a god, and I let them have it, considering they just watched me solo an army. Vivian and Diana watched me from the crowd, and I could feel the weight of her gaze like a physical thing on my skin. Word spread through the territory that I'd turned back 30,000 with a mood swing, and the griffin didn't get any credit at all. So I've got a reputation now, like a favorite uncle who also casually deletes armies, and people think I can hold off a 9th tier emperor solo. I let that rumor ride, because confidence is a currency, and I need every coin I can pocket for what's coming next. At the council meeting that night, I reminded everyone that the lizardmen are still on the other side of the river, and that's a debt that doesn't expire. I told them we weren't gonna just defend, we were gonna cross that swamp and hit them first, and that got the room's blood up. I also told them that the army needed to be strong, because I've bought them time, and I don't plan on being the only Thor in this village. Everyone promised to train, the minotaurs especially, and I gave them that speech about not becoming a bunch of self-important dead weight. 3 months passed, and my territory had a quiet spell, which in this neighborhood just means the other shoe is loading up its laces. It's September 1st, and a man named Andre, one of my small team leaders, comes stumbling and looking like a used dish rag soaked in blood. He'd been sent with a squad to subdue a territory called Azure Mist, and he got all the way to the Lord's castle before things got weird. A pack of rotting corpses came out of the woods, and I don't mean metaphors, I mean actual walking corpses, and they swarmed him. They weren't strong, but they wouldn't die, and eventually his 50 knights couldn't hold the line, so he retreated back to me to cry about it. Now I've heard of corpses before, back in Quartz City, and I know they come from corrupted magic and black magic gone sideways. That means there's a fallen mage in Azure Mist, which is like a scientist who decided the human body is a fun project and nobody's in the lab. I left my griffin at home to watch the castle and took my spotted winged tiger, and the two of us flew off with Andre and his dragonblood knights. Azure Mist sits up on a mountain wrapped in white fog, and I swear the mist smelled exactly like the misty forest back home. It smells like rot and something sweet underneath, the kind of perfume that tells you someone's been killing things in their basement for fun. We got further in, the fog thinned out, and I saw the village, pale folks working with dead eyes like every face on Dawson's Creek if everyone was a zombie. The villagers spotted us and scattered like roaches hitting the kitchen light, and I knew then that this wasn't a proud old lord's welcome. I told the boys to brace, and out of the fog came over 2,000 rotting corpses, festering skin, white eyes, all dressed in different uniforms. The corpses filled the field in front of us, and I noticed something odd. The population of this territory is only around 2,000, so these are all locals. Andre and his knights charged in swinging, and they carved through the dead like they were butter, but they just kept getting back up. You can't kill something that's already dead, and numbers kept piling up, so I was about to step in when a laugh came out of the mist. An old man with white hair and a big head walked out with his own little troop, and he was proud as a father at a graduation, telling me he knew I'd be back. He called his corpse horde a feast, and he didn't know that he'd just invited a predator to a table full of leftovers. I used observation hockey to count his soldiers, all of them below the 4th tier, which meant he thought 1,000 shambling dead men could keep me busy. I raised my arm toward the battlefield and called it extreme cold hell, and my chill shot out guided by observation hockey to dodge my own people. Every corpse in the field went from rotting to frozen solid, one ice sculpture per walking dead, and the old lord's laughter cut off like someone unplugged him. He had time to say one confused what happened, and then I was standing in front of him, ice cold and utterly unimpressed. I asked if he was the Lord of Azure Mist, and he demanded to know who I was, and I gave him the same name I gave the lizardman chieftain. He asked what I wanted, and I told him that I need to occupy this territory, because in this world, dead land and live land both get annexed. He screamed for his soldiers to stop me, and they charged with vigor, which was genuinely cute, and I kept walking, and they kept freezing. Each soldier got within arm's reach and became a popsicle, their faces hung up in fear, and I walked through them like they were museum exhibits. The old lord tried to negotiate, offering to give me the territory and take me to the man who made the corpses, so long as I let him walk. I shook my head and told him that decision wasn't mine to make. I'd let the people of the village decide his fate, and his face went white. He screamed that his life shouldn't depend on a bunch of lowly folk, which was all I needed to hear to know exactly how this would go. I told him he already knew his fate then, and an ice needle appeared at my fingertip, and he turned to run with every ounce of dignity he had left. I put a hole in his head before he made it 10 feet, and he died with his eyes wide open, still not grasping the math of why his people would hate him. That man had made corpses out of his own citizens, and he was surprised no one would vote for him, which is a lesson in local governance I'll gladly teach. I left him on the ground and started thinking about who turned those bodies, because this fallen mage is someone's bigger problem, and now it's mine. The fog is still rolling in, colder now that the bodies are frozen, and I gotta find the power behind this little science project. One down, one to go, but I've got a feeling the man behind the curtain is a lot less fun than the marionette, and he's probably watching me already. I've made the locals stir, I've made a lord into a sculpture, and now I'm heading deeper into a mist that smells like rot and bad decisions. So there I was, strolling through a dead town looking for a ghost, and the ghost finds me first. An arrow whistled past my ear, and I turned to see a skeleton aiming a second shot at my head. A centaur skeleton, lower body horse, upper body bones, standing there like he owned the whole rotten street. Centaurs live on the northern grasslands, so either this guy was lost or somebody dragged him here for parts. He let another arrow fly, but I was already an ice sculpture before it touched me, so no harm done. These corpses couldn't use spiritual energy, which meant they couldn't touch a natural type like me at all. I just walked past him and froze him solid, which felt a little rude, honestly, but I was on a clock. Everywhere I looked there were corpses in every stage of falling apart, and I realized this was a process. A rotting corpse just gets older and older until it becomes a skeleton, which is a terrible way to think about immortality. You know how your grandma has that one photo album she shows you every single time you visit? This whole town was the corpse version of that, same story on every street, and I was already bored of it. The fog got thicker the deeper I went, until I hit a mossy old castle that smelled like wet stone and secrets. Candlelight flickered inside, cobwebs in every corner, and I pushed the door open like I was paying rent. The books alone told me everything: dark elements, soul contracts, forbidden magic circles, the complete guide to bad decisions. This was a fallen mage's library, and every single volume here was the kind of thing that gets you burned at the stake. A bookshelf slid aside, and a middle-aged man with dirty blonde hair and dead eyes stepped out of the wall. He wore a tattered black robe with dried blood stains, and he smelled like a hospital that had given up on hygiene. He asked who I was, so I told him I was from the Magic Association, which was a lie, but a useful one. His pupils went wide, then he pulled a wand and started chanting, so I let him get through a whole 5 seconds. A 4th-tier mage is genuinely dangerous, but only to people who don't happen to be made of ice. He threw 5 dark fireballs my way, and every single one froze mid-air and dropped to the floor like dead birds. He panicked, tried to run, and hit a switch to close the wall, which I froze solid out of spite. Then I dropped an ice wall in his path, walked up, and froze his whole body with just his head sticking out. With casting times that long, no wonder these guys need a big dumb warrior standing in front of them all day. I asked him who he was and what he was doing here, and he just glared at me like I owed him money. So I said fine, turned around, and started walking into the secret passage, because I don't negotiate with hostage situations. He screamed stop with his whole chest, which was interesting, because that wasn't the reaction of a man protecting his stash. His voice went from angry to begging in about 3 seconds, and he offered to tell me everything I wanted to know. I froze his head solid anyway, because a man who begs that fast is usually saving his lies for later. The secret room was spotless, which made me trust him even less, and the books had notes in the margins, like a high school senior's textbook, but the subject was necromancy, and the homework was probably a crime. One room was a morgue, freezers full of corpses from every race you can name, and I mean every single race. He was running experiments on the dead, which is gross, but at least he wasn't using live subjects, so that was something. The next room had rotting corpses locked in cages, and a workbench covered in hearts, bones, and unreadable lab reports. I couldn't read a word of the handwriting, which was honestly a relief, because I didn't want to know what those notes meant. The last room was locked, so I split the gate in 2 with a cold flash, and I walked into pink hell. Pink walls, pink bed, pink carpet, and in the middle of it all, an ice coffin holding a beautiful pale woman. She looked dead, but not quite dead, like she was parked somewhere between this world and the next one. I couldn't figure out her condition, so I went back to the old man, since I had questions and he had answers. He tried to start chanting again the second he could move, so I reminded him that his lady friend was still in the ice. He collapsed like a puppet with the strings cut, and he asked who I really was, since I wasn't from the association. He knew because the real ones would have killed him on sight and taken the woman without asking a single question. He admitted the association was hunting him, which meant he was from the Sunset Empire, just like I was. I asked if the corpses were his doing, and he snapped, said he only worked on the dead, not the living. He said the association was worse, experimenting on live people, and my observation hockey told me he was telling the truth. So I let him talk, and for an hour he poured out the whole story while I checked every word against his heartbeat. His name was Eric, the woman in the coffin was Lily, and he used to work for the association's research division. 15 years ago they dragged him into a secret lab full of fallen mages, and the research topic was immortality. They used living humans for their experiments, and Eric couldn't stomach it, so he kept planning to run. Then he met Lily, a young test subject, and he abandoned every escape plan he had to keep her safe. He treated her like a daughter, and he rose through the ranks just to stay close to her, which is a terrible survival strategy. 3 years ago, the vice president of the association, an 8th Order light mage, took Lily away from him. She came back alive but broken, her soul withered away, and Eric knew the institute had just killed his girl. He grabbed Lily and ran, crossed the whole land, and ended up here in the Azure Mist territory hiding from the world. He spent 3 years studying forbidden resurrection magic, trying to call her soul back, and the corpses outside were his failures. The old lord found out about the corpses and made a deal, giving Eric bodies in exchange for the ability to control the dead. So all the rot I cut through today came from a grieving man's obsession, and the lord sold his people for an army. Rotten corpses were just failed experiments to Eric, which is a sentence I can't believe I just said out loud to you. I looked at this man and saw something useful, a researcher with nowhere to go and nothing left to lose. So I told him my name, and that I was from Dawn territory, and that we were both fugitives from the Sunset Empire. He asked if I was wanted too, and I said no, I just got tired of the scenery and decided to leave. I offered him a place in my territory, and he asked if he had a choice, and I told him he didn't. Then I dangled the one thing he wanted more than breath. I said I had a way to save his daughter. He grabbed my shoulder and asked if I was serious, and I just smiled, which made him back off real fast. I told him my territory needed research talent, and that he could atone for his sins by working for me. And his daughter, well, the method was expensive, so he had to prove his worth first before I spent a cent on her. He asked how he could trust me, and I asked him if he had a choice, which isn't a very comforting answer. That night we carried the ice coffin out of the castle, and Eric watched me use spatial magic, which blew his mind. Spatial magic is rarer than dark magic, so he started to believe I might actually have something to offer. Back in town, the steward told me the old lord bought his corpses from pirates who sold dead slaves to monsters. Pirates would pack slaves onto ships, and when they died in transit, they sold them off to goblins and ogres for food. Andre and the others went pale hearing that, because they were all former slaves, and that could have been them. I asked where the pirate lair was, and I filed that information away, because that's a problem I'm gonna solve later. I plan to wipe out those beasts and take over their supply lines, since my territory is desperately short on people. Taking over a slave trade to save people feels like the kind of moral math that keeps a guy awake at night. We rode back to my land, and the difference between the two territories hit everyone in the face like a wet towel. My people were building houses, cultivating fields, and paving roads, and every single one of them smiled when I passed. It wasn't the scared bowing you get from fear, it was the kind of respect you gotta earn with actual results. Eric stared at the whole scene like a man who had never seen a functioning town, and asked how we grew so fast. I told him it was complicated and that he would find out soon, because I was tired of answering questions for the whole ride. I handed him off to my head researcher, and I figured the two science nerds would hit it off like a house on fire. Then a small figure staggered toward me, and I looked down to see my 2-month-old son Faraday walking, which isn't normal at all. The kid had my eyes and a calm look that didn't belong on a baby, and he handed me a tiny den mushi. He bred the snail himself, according to Jenny, and I was honestly more proud of him than I had been of anything in months. I nuzzled his cheek and he laughed, and that sound alone made the whole rotten trip worth every mile. In the lab, my researcher Hack had an even bigger head than last time, and Faraday climbed right up to perch on it. Hack and Eric started talking and didn't stop, and they bonded over Lily, the coffin, and the promise of a cure.